this isn't exciting. That's the point. So take the pressure off, relax, and let these old stories guide you gently towards sleep. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. There's nothing quite like a Victorian London winter to make you appreciate central heating. Back in the late 1800s, winters in the city were less a season and more of an endurance test. You'd think the weather was plotting against you, but the truth is, the climate wasn't the real villain. No, the real culprits behind those brutal winters were poor urban planning, shoddy insulation, and the notorious London fog that was more like inhaling a coal-fired chimney than a cosy stroll through a misty street. First, let's talk about that infamous fog, or as it was more accurately known, pea soupers. Picture this, a fog so thick you couldn't see your own feet, let alone the hands of Big Ben. The fog wasn't just a charming backdrop for a Sherlock Holmes story. It was a smoggy cocktail of smoke and sulphur dioxide, courtesy of the coal fires burning around the clock. Londoners were essentially living in a city-sized smokehouse, minus the delicious bacon. It was 1873 when the Great Smog really made its mark, lasting 5 days and causing over 1,000 deaths. The Londoners of the day called it the killer fog, which really says it all. Now, what about warming up at home? Victorian houses might look romantic with their ornate fireplaces and cosy-looking facades, but they were about as insulating as a lace doily in a snowstorm. The walls were thin, the windows draughty, and the fireplaces, while picturesque, were more for show than warmth. Coal was the go-to for heating, but it was expensive, especially if you were part of the working class, scraping by on an average income of $70 a year. To put it in perspective, a ton of coal cost about $150, and you'd need several tons to keep a modest home warm through the winter. That's like burning your paycheck just to keep your teeth from chattering. Then there was the matter of clothing. Victorian fashion was all about layers, corsets, petticoats, waistcoats, and woolen everything. While it added some insulation, it was more about maintaining societal norms than actual warmth. You'd be bundled up like a human onion, which was great until you had to walk anywhere. Then you'd be sweating inside your cloak while your nose froze off, all for the sake of propriety. Walking through the streets was another test of endurance. Thanks to the lack of proper drainage and the aforementioned fog, London's streets were often a slushy mess. Combine that with horse-drawn carriages, and you got a recipe for streets slick with muck and mystery substances best left unidentified. It wasn't just the weather that was against you. The city itself seemed to conspire to make every outing a challenge. Economically, the harshness of winter hit the working class hardest. Many relied on seasonal work that dried up when temperatures dropped, leaving them to choose between food and fuel. Charities tried to fill the gap with soup kitchens and coal distribution, but it was like trying to warm up a lake with a candle. The economic disparity was stark, and the harsh winter months only highlighted the gap between the haves and the have-nots. While today's romantic notions might paint Victorian winters as a time of ice skating and holiday cheer, the reality was a far cry from a Dickensian Christmas card. The only thing more chilling than the temperatures might have been the social inequality. Reports from the time, like those from Henry Mayhew, an English social researcher, paint a much grimmer picture than any rosy-hued Christmas tale. Mayhew wrote about families huddling together in one room to conserve heat, or workers fainting from cold and exhaustion. So, while it might be tempting to romanticize the era as one of quaint, foggy evenings and cosy firesides, the truth is far less charming. Victorian Londoners battled the elements and the odds every winter with little more than grit and coal dust in their lungs. It's no wonder that when spring finally rolled around, it must have felt like a reprieve from an icy purgatory. In essence, if you find yourself yearning for the days of top hats and horse-drawn carriages, just remember the winters. The next time you adjust your thermostat or seal a drafty window, spare a thought for those who weathered the unforgiving chill of Victorian London with little more than a stiff upper lip and a hope that spring would come soon. But hold on to your top hats, folks, because we're not done with the grim realities of Victorian winters just yet. Let's dive into the coal conundrum that kept Londoners tethered to their shivering fates. Coal was the undisputed monarch of Victorian energy sources. It powered the Industrial Revolution, warmed homes, and filled the air with that infamous pea super fog we love to romanticize. But like all monarchs, coal demanded its pound of flesh, in this case, from your wallet and your lungs. At the heart of it, coal was as indispensable as it was maddeningly expensive. Picture this. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and demand for coal was skyrocketing. Factories churning out textiles, machinery, and just about everything else under the Victorian sun were gobbling up coal like it was the last crumpet at high tea. This demand drove prices up, making coal both a necessity and a luxury, a paradox if ever there was one. Now, if you were part of the upper crust, you might have had the financial clout to burn coal like there was no tomorrow, which was good because the pollution made it look like there might not be. But for the working class, coal was a budget-breaking extravagance. The average family needed about 5 tons of coal to get through a winter, which at 1.50 per ton could easily swallow up a tenth of their annual income. That's like spending today's rent money just to huddle around a barely warm fireplace. And let's not forget that this was coal of questionable quality, often mixed with slate and other impurities to bulk up the weight and bulk down the heat. It was as if you were paying for a gourmet meal but getting served a plate of rocks instead. In this chilly economic climate, the government tried to step in with some regulatory warmth. The Weights and Measures Act of 1889 was one such attempt, a legislative hand-warmer, if you will. This act aimed to standardise coal weights and ensure buyers weren't getting short-changed by unscrupulous coal merchants. But like trying to nail jelly to a wall, enforcing this was easier said than done. The coal market was rife with shenanigans, and quality control was as elusive as a sunny day in November. Coal merchants had a reputation that made used car salesmen look like paragons of virtue. The act was a step in the right direction, but it was a bit like putting a band-aid on a frostbite. Let's not forget the economic disparities that were as stark as the soot-stained snow. The wealthy could afford the luxury of consistent warmth, while the working class often had to choose between feeding their families and keeping them from turning into human popsicles. It was a classic case of heat or eat, a dilemma that left many shivering in their threadbare boots. The disparity was so pronounced that in particularly harsh winters, it wasn't uncommon for people to resort to burning furniture or even floorboards just to stave off frostbite. That's right, folks. Victorian DIY meant dismantling your dining room table for a few minutes of flickering warmth. Amidst all this, charities and philanthropic efforts popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, trying their best to fill the gap. Soup kitchens and coal distribution drives were the Victorian safety net, albeit a patchy one. They offered some relief, but it was like trying to heat the ocean with a tiny bonfire. The Society for the Relief of Distress was one such organisation, doling out coal tickets to those in dire need. However, the demand often exceeded supply, and it was a logistical nightmare akin to herding cats in a snowstorm. In the grand tapestry of Victorian society, coal was a thread that tied together the era's industrial might and its social inequities. It powered engines and heated homes, but it also left a trail of soot-stained poverty in its wake. The quest for warmth was a daily struggle, and for many it was a battle they could never fully win. The next time you adjust your thermostat, think of the Londoners who faced the bitter chill armed with nothing more than a few lumps of coal and a stiff upper lip. And remember, for every romantic notion of Victorian winters, there's an equal measure of gritty reality lurking just beneath the surface. So, let's keep our mittens on and our minds open as we continue to unravel the frosty truths of this fascinating era. Now that we've got our mittens firmly on and the chilly truths of Victorian London swirling around us like a foggy cloak, let's take a step into the city's infrastructure, or, more accurately, its infrastructural follies. Victorian London was a marvel of its time, sure, but not exactly the paragon of comfort. It was like trying to ice skate on a bumpy cobblestone street, technically possible, but not without its challenges. First off, let's talk about those drafty homes. The Victorian aesthetic might conjure images of grand facades and elegant bay windows, but the reality was more like living inside a beautifully decorated sieve. Homes were often built in a hurry to accommodate the booming population, and quality took a back seat to quantity. You see, the Industrial Revolution had London swelling like a Victorian gentleman's waistline after one too many extravagant dinners. The city's population ballooned from about 1 million in 1800 to over 6.5 million by 1900. That's like adding the entire current population of Singapore to London in a century. Needless to say, architects and builders were more focused on cramming people in than keeping the cold out. The walls of these homes were thinner than a pauper's penny, and the windows might as well have been open invitations to Jack Frost. The ornate fireplaces, while charming, were more ceremonial than functional. They often only heated the room they were in, leaving the rest of the house as frigid as a politician's handshake. And let's not forget that burning coal was both an art and a science, requiring just the right amount of airflow and stacking to produce maximum warmth with minimal smoke. Without central heating, the best you could do was shuffle from fireplace to fireplace, trying to avoid frostbite in the hallway. Now, if you wanted to venture beyond your frosty abode, you'd have to brave the pitfalls of Victorian public transportation. Let's just say it was more public than transportation. The omnibuses, think of a horse-drawn bus, were the primary mode of transport. These hulking carriages were like sardine cans on wheels, packed to the brim with shivering passengers. The fares were relatively affordable, but the experience was anything but comfortable. You were likely to be jostled, bumped, and occasionally elbowed in the ribs as you squeezed your way to a seat if you were lucky enough to find one. And don't even get me started on the roads. If you thought modern-day potholes were bad, Victorian streets were a veritable obstacle course. Cobblestones were the norm, and when it snowed, they turned into a slippery mess. Londoners had to navigate these treacherous paths while dodging horse-drawn carriages and the ever-present muck of city life. The occasional icy patch was just the universe's way of keeping your reflexes sharp. Commuting in winter was less about getting from point A to point B and more about surviving the journey in between. But what if you couldn't afford even the dubious luxury of an omnibus ticket? Enter the workhouses, the Victorian answer to homelessness and poverty. These institutions were meant to provide shelter and employment to the destitute, but they were more Dickensian nightmare than humanitarian haven. Imagine a place where the walls were as cold as the welcome, and the work was as grueling as the conditions. Workhouses were often overcrowded, with residents living in cramped quarters and working long hours for meagre rations. It was like a factory floor with a side of despair. The social norms of the day played a huge role in determining who had access to warmth and who was left out in the cold. The class divide was as stark as the soot-stained snow on London's streets. The wealthy could afford to insulate themselves, literally and figuratively, against the elements. They had their coal deliveries, thicker walls, and plush furnishings to keep the chill at bay. Meanwhile, the working class had to make do with what little they could afford or scrounge. It was a tale of two cities, playing out within the same foggy streets. Victorian society was rife with moral judgment, often viewing poverty as a personal failing rather than a systemic issue. Charitable efforts, while well-intentioned, often came with strings attached, like religious instruction or mandatory attendance at services. It was charity with a side of sermonizing, as if the only way to warm the body was to first warm the soul. The irony, of course, was that the upper classes, snug in their well-insulated homes, were often the biggest proponents of these moralistic views. It's much easier to preach about bootstraps when your boots are lined with fur. In the midst of all this, there were those who tried to bridge the gap. Philanthropists, reformers, and social commentators like Charles Booth and C-Bomb Rowntree worked to highlight the plight of the poor and push for change. Their studies and reports shed light on the harsh realities of life in Victorian London, painting a picture that was as vivid as it was grim. Booth's poverty maps, in particular, were groundbreaking, illustrating the socio-economic conditions of London's various districts with stark clarity. And yet, in spite of the hardships, there was a certain resilience to Victorian Londoners. They adapted to their environment, finding creative ways to keep warm and make the best of a bad situation. Whether it was sharing a hearth with neighbours, layering clothing to trap heat, or simply gritting their teeth and getting on with it, Londoners found ways to endure. It was a testament to the human spirit, or perhaps just stubbornness, that they managed to survive and even thrive in such inhospitable conditions. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about a drafty window or a delayed bus, spare a thought for those who traversed the icy streets of Victorian London with little more than a hope for spring and a few lumps of dubious coal. As we delve deeper into the frosty truths of this era, remember that beneath the romanticized veneer of foggy evenings lies a history of grit, perseverance, and a fair bit of soot. So, you've got your mittens on and your mind buzzing with the pressing realities of Victorian London's winters. Let's turn our attention to a less tangible, yet equally significant, layer of protection against the biting chill, fashion. Or should I say, the art of bundling up like a human nesting doll. Because when it came to Victorian attire, layering was less about staying chic and more about staving off hypothermia. Imagine stepping out into a London street wrapped in enough layers to make an onion jealous. Underneath those iconic frock coats and bustled skirts were woolen undergarments that clung to the skin like an itchy second layer. Yes, wool was the fabric of choice, not because it was particularly stylish, but because it was a poor conductor of heat, meaning it trapped body warmth like a miser hoarding gold. And let's face it, when you're shivering in a drafty house, you'll take all the warmth you can get, even if it means enduring an itch that would drive a saint to sin. The typical Victorian ensemble was an exercise in endurance. For men, it started with woolen drawers and a shirt, followed by a waistcoat, trousers, and finally, the piece de resistance, the overcoat. These overcoats were more than just a style statement. They were the last line of defence against the cold, heavy enough to double as a workout if you were inclined to skip the gym. A decent overcoat could weigh around 10 pounds, a literal burden of warmth draped across your shoulders. Women, on the other hand, had an even more intricate dance with fashion. They began with a chemise and drawers, layered with a corset that could cinch a waist tighter than an accountant's budget. Next came the petticoats, sometimes up to 6 of them, followed by the dress itself. It was like wearing a small tent minus the insulation. The final flourish was a woolen shawl or a cloak, because heaven forbid a lady be seen with her arms uncovered. The layering might have kept them warm, but it also restricted movement, making the simple act of walking a calculated manoeuvre akin to performing a tightrope act in a circus. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say the crinoline in the closet. Crinolines were all the rage in the 1860s, those wide, bell-shaped frames that made women appear as if they were perpetually ready to take flight. While they added a certain majestic flair, the practicality of these contraptions in a crowded urban environment was questionable at best. Picture trying to navigate a narrow alleyway with what amounted to a hoop skirt on steroids. It was a feat of spatial awareness and balance, a challenge not unlike steering a ship through the eye of a needle. But let's not get too misty-eyed about Victorian fashion. It was as much about social signalling as it was about warmth. The wealthier you were, the more elaborate and impractical your attire could afford to be. Fashion was a social language, and the affluent spoke it fluently with silk and satin accents. For the working class, however, practicality reigned supreme. Clothes had to be durable, versatile, and affordable, more function than form, more resilience than refinement. And speaking of economics, let's not forget the tailors and seamstresses who kept this whole sartorial circus spinning. The garment industry was a booming business, employing thousands in cramped workshops that were as stifling in summer as they were frigid in winter. These workers churned out clothing at a pace that would make a modern-day fast fashion brand blush. Yet they were often paid a pittance, a stark reminder that the sumptuous layers of the well-to-do were built on the backs of the overworked and underpaid. The price of fashion wasn't just economic, it was also ecological. The dyes used in fabrics were often toxic, leaching harmful chemicals into the air and water. The vibrant hues that graced the wardrobes of the upper class came at a cost not just to their pocketbooks, but to the environment and the health of those who worked with them. The romantic image of Victorian fashion, with its elaborate patterns and rich colours, belies a grim reality of pollution and exploitation. Yet despite the hardships, there was a certain ingenuity in how people dressed to survive. They layered strategically, using every piece of clothing as a barrier against the cold. It was an era when necessity truly was the mother of invention. The fashion choices of the time were a testament to human resilience, a reflection of a society that found ways to adapt to its harsh realities, even if it meant doing so with a stiff collar and an even stiffer upper lip. The next time you slip into a cosy sweater, or pull on a pair of thermal leggings, spare a thought for those who braved the cold with little more than a woolen undergarment and a prayer. Victorian fashion was a complex tapestry of style, status, and survival, a multifaceted garment that clothed a society in all its contradictions. As we continue to unravel the frosty truths of this fascinating era, remember that beneath the layers of lace and wool lies a story woven with threads of grit, determination, and an unyielding will to endure. But enough about fashion. Let's move from the itchy layers of wool to the cosy warmth of community. You see, when Victorian Londoners weren't busy fighting off frostbite with their wardrobes, They were finding ingenious ways to keep their spirits warmer than their toes. Yes, folks, when the temperatures dropped, the social scene heated up. Victorians may not have had Netflix or central heating, but they sure knew how to turn a frigid night into a carnival of camaraderie. First up, let's talk about the rise of indoor entertainment. When the streets were more suited for penguins than pedestrians, Londoners turned their living rooms into stages. Theatres and opera houses were all the rage, but for those who couldn't afford the ticket, homegrown productions became the order of the day. Families would gather around the fireplace, the original social media platform, if you will, and put on plays or read aloud from popular novels. Charles Dickens was a favourite, his stories as much a staple of winter evenings as a steaming cup of mulled wine. It's no wonder Dickens's tales of redemption and cheer became synonymous with Christmas itself. He was practically the mascot of winter resilience. Now, let's not forget the music. The Victorian era was a symphony of amateur musicianship. Pianos were as central to a middle-class home as the internet router is today, and if you didn't have a piano, well, you'd better have a friend who did. Music was the universal language that brought people together, whether it was a sing-along around the piano or a more formal musicale. These gatherings were a way to stave off the chill and the ennui, a reminder that even in the darkest months there was still harmony to be found. Speaking of harmony, let's address the heart of the home, the fireplace. The hearth was where families would gather, swapping stories and warmth in equal measure. It was the Victorian version of the water cooler, a place where news was exchanged and gossip was as rich as the coal smoke. But more than that, it was a hub of community. Neighbours would drop by, bringing with them a loaf of bread or a pot of stew, because nothing said, "I care," like sharing calories and company. It wasn't just about staying warm, it was about staying connected. And what about those who couldn't gather around their own hearth? Enter the public houses. The pub was more than just a place to grab a pint. It was the beating heart of Victorian social life. In winter, it transformed into a refuge, offering ale and an open fire to anyone willing to brave the cold for a bit of warmth and camaraderie. Here, stories were swapped, deals were struck, and community was forged in the flickering light of the fire. It was the great equalizer, where the barriers of class could be momentarily forgotten over a glass of gin and a shared laugh. But let's not romanticize too much. These gatherings, whether in homes or pubs, were as much about survival as they were about socializing. The harsh economic realities meant that pooling resources was often a necessity. It was a practical solution to the problem of keeping warm when coal was costly and the winter long. It was a reminder that in the face of adversity, community became not just a comfort, but a lifeline. Now, you might be wondering, what about the lasting impact of these Victorian winter traditions? Well, look no further than our modern winter festivities. The communal spirit that defined Victorian gatherings still echoes in our holiday celebrations. Think about it, the office Christmas party, the family dinner, even the ubiquitous Secret Santa. These are all descendants of Victorian traditions. They remind us that, while the methods may have changed, the desire to find warmth in each other's company remains as strong as ever. And let's not forget the literary legacy. Dickens's influence on the holiday season is undeniable. A Christmas Carol alone has been adapted more times than anyone can count, each iteration a testament to the enduring appeal of redemption and goodwill. It's a story that has transcended its era, a Victorian tale with a modern heart. In essence, the Victorians taught us that winter wasn't just a season to endure, but a time to engage. They showed us that even when the world seems cold and inhospitable, there's warmth to be found in the company of others. And while we may have traded the crackling fireplace for the glow of a smartphone, the spirit of those gatherings still flickers in our hearts. So, the next time you find yourself wrapped in a cozy blanket, sipping hot cocoa and surrounded by loved ones, remember the Victorians. They navigated winters that were as much a test of community as they were of personal endurance. In the end, they remind us that no matter how cold the world may seem, the warmth of human connection is the greatest comfort of all. And there you have it, folks. The story of Victorian London's winters, a tale woven with threads of fashion, coal and community. It's a story that reminds us of the grit and grace of a bygone era and the ways in which the past continues to shape our present. So, as you cozy up this winter, spare a thought for those who braved the chill with little more than a woolen shawl and a hopeful heart. And remember, when it comes to keeping warm, sometimes all you need is a good story and a friend to share it with. Ancient Roman farmers didn't quite live in the bucolic paradise that's often painted in movies and TV shows. They weren't sipping wine under olive trees while the sun set over their expansive fields. Nope, in reality, they were more like the ancient world's version of a start-up entrepreneur, constantly hustling, perpetually in debt, and always at the mercy of forces they couldn't control. And like any good startup, they had a set of tools they hoped would revolutionize their world. Let's start with those tools, shall we? Roman farmers didn't have the luxury of modern machinery, but they made do with some pretty nifty gadgets for their time. The caratrum, for instance, was the Roman version of a plough. This wasn't your average backyard plough, though. It was a beast that needed a couple of oxen to drag it through the fields. The caratrum furge was so essential that Roman writers like Cato and Varro waxed poetic about its virtues. Yet, it was as clunky as a medieval siege engine and about as easy to maneuver. The Romans also had the cephalus, a sickle for harvesting crops. Unlike the sleek stainless steel versions we have today, the Roman falx was a curved iron blade that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. Now, let's talk crops. The Roman menu was heavily dependent on what they could grow. Wheat was the superstar of Roman agriculture, not too surprising since it was turned into bread, the staple of the Roman diet. They also cultivated barley, which was the grain equivalent of a reliable but unexciting second-string player. Barley was primarily used as animal feed, but it also found its way into the diet of the lower classes and soldiers. Wine grapes, olives, and a variety of fruits and vegetables rounded out the Roman farmer's portfolio, each with its own demands and rewards. For instance, grapevines required a lot of attention, but they were worth it for the liquid gold they produced. Wine, which was as important to Romans as coffee is to modern office workers. Economically, agriculture was the lifeblood of Roman society. Forget about tech stocks or real estate. In Rome, land was the ultimate status symbol. The more land you owned, the more you controlled the food supply, and thus, the more power you wielded. It was a simple equation. Land equals grain, grain equals bread, and bread equals political clout. This wasn't just about feeding your family. It was about feeding the empire and keeping it from collapsing into chaos. The Roman economy was so intertwined with agriculture that when wheat supplies ran low, riots could erupt faster than you could say, Carthago delenda est. But let's debunk the myth of the idyllic Roman farmer. In the popular imagination, these folks are often seen as noble yeomen, living in harmony with the land. The reality, they were more like overworked, underappreciated cogs in the Roman machine. Most Roman farmers were tenant farmers or smallholders struggling to make ends meet. They were caught between the rock of high taxes and the hard place of unpredictable weather, with the occasional barbarian invasion thrown in for good measure. Many farmers worked land they didn't even own, perpetually in debt to wealthy landowners who could repossess their plots faster than a Roman chariot racer. The pastoral image of the Roman countryside was largely a fiction peddled by poets and politicians. Virgil, for example, romanticized rural life in his Georgics, but let's be real, he wasn't exactly out there breaking his back in the fields. The real Roman farmers were more concerned with back-breaking labour and keeping their families fed than with pondering the beauty of nature. In terms of daily life, farming dictated the rhythm of existence. It was a sun-up to sundown ordeal with little room for leisure. Roman farmers were at the mercy of the seasons, with each one bringing its own set of challenges. Spring was for planting, summer for tending, autumn for harvesting, and winter for praying. You had enough to last until the cycle began again. The work was relentless, and the rewards were meagre for most. So there you have it. The world of Roman agriculture was complex, demanding, and far from the tranquil scenes depicted in classical art. It was an industry driven by necessity and survival, not by the pastoral fantasies that have persisted through the ages. And yet, despite its challenges, agriculture was the backbone of the Roman Empire, feeding its armies, its people, and its ambitions. The Roman farmer may not have lived in an idyllic paradise, but they were the unsung heroes who made the empire possible. And speaking of making the empire possible, let's dive into the Roman farmer's bag of tricks, or should I say their toolkit of survival. We're talking innovation here, folks. In an era where the most advanced piece of technology was a water clock, Roman farmers were basically the Silicon Valley of antiquity, minus the hoodies and venture capital. They pioneered crop rotation, a method that kept the land from turning into a barren wasteland faster than you can say "et tu, brute." Crop rotation was like nature's very own magic trick. Instead of planting the same crop year after year, which would deplete the soil faster than a teenager's phone battery, Roman farmers rotated between different crops. They might plant wheat one year, then legumes like beans or peas the next. This wasn't just some agricultural whimsy, it was science. Leguminous plants actually fix nitrogen in the soil, making it richer and more fertile for the next round of wheat. It was like giving the soil a spa day, ensuring it could keep producing those all-important grains. This practice wasn't merely a nod to Mother Nature's whims, it was essential for maintaining soil fertility and, by extension, the stability of the entire Roman food supply. Now, let's talk about irrigation systems. If you thought Rome's aqueducts were only about bringing water to those grand baths and fountains, think again. These marvels of engineering were also crucial for agriculture. The Romans devised extensive irrigation systems that utilized aqueducts to supply water to parched fields. This wasn't just about quenching the earth's thirst, it was about extending the growing season, allowing for multiple harvests in a year. Essentially, they were wringing every last drop of productivity out of their land, much like a modern-day CEO squeezing the quarterly earnings report for every penny. But it wasn't all roses and wine grapes. You see, the Romans were also environmental troublemakers in their own right. Their aggressive agricultural practices led to deforestation and soil erosion on a scale that would make even the most ambitious modern-day developers blush. Large-scale deforestation to clear land for agriculture and fuel the empire's insatiable appetite for wood was rampant. Overworked land often ended up barren, a fact that didn't just impact the Roman bottom line, but also contributed to environmental degradation that would haunt future generations. And let's not forget the not-so-small matter of slave labor. Ah yes, the elephant in the Roman field. While the pastoral scenes of happy farmers tilling the land might warm the heart, the reality was far grimmer. The backbone of Roman agriculture was, quite literally, the backbone of thousands of enslaved people. Slavery in Rome wasn't just a side hustle, it was a cornerstone of their economic model. These individuals performed the back-breaking work needed to keep the empire fed, with little hope of freedom or fair treatment. They were the real, unsung heroes, or perhaps the tragic victims of Rome's agricultural success story. The reliance on slave labor wasn't just morally questionable, it was economically risky. Sure, Rome could boast about its cheap labor force, but this dependence also led to a stagnant innovation curve. Why invest in agricultural advancements when you could just work your human resources harder? It created a system where technological progress moved at a snail's pace, largely because it was easier to exploit human labor than to invent new solutions. This short-sightedness would eventually catch up with them, as it always does when you build an empire on the backs of the oppressed. But let's peel back another layer of this historical onion. The Roman reliance on slave labor wasn't just a choice, it was an economic necessity dictated by the social and political stratification of the time. Wealthy landowners, think of them as the venture capitalists of the Roman world, owned vast estates called latifundia. These estates were so large they made your average family farm look like a window box garden. These land barons needed a workforce that was both large and cheap, and slave labor fit the bill perfectly. This system allowed the elites to hoard wealth and power, while the small-scale farmers were often left struggling to compete. The little guys couldn't match the cheap workforce of the latifundia, which meant they either went into debt or sold their land, further concentrating wealth and land ownership into fewer hands. Sound familiar? It's almost like a Roman version of the modern-day gig economy, but with a lot more chains and a lot less choice. So, there you have it, a peek behind the curtain of Rome's agricultural machine. From innovative farming techniques to the grim realities of slave labor, it's a tale of ambition, ingenuity, and exploitation. The Roman Empire may have been built on the glory of its conquests and architectural wonders, but it was sustained by the silent toil of the fields. These innovations and exploitations were deeply intertwined, creating a complex tapestry that fed the empire and laid the groundwork for its eventual challenges. As we continue our journey through Roman agriculture, keep your eyes peeled for more truths hiding in the shadows of history's grand narratives. There's more to uncover, and our exploration is far from over. Little did the Romans know that their agricultural system was like a house of cards, delicately balanced on the backs of slaves and the whims of the wealthy. Yet, while we've glimpsed the engine room of this mighty Roman ship, it's time to steer our focus toward how all this agricultural wealth and power translated into political muscle and social stratification. Because in Rome, land wasn't just a piece of earth, it was a ticket to the big leagues. Imagine a world where owning land was akin to holding a golden key to the Roman Senate. The more land you had, the more political clout you wielded. Forget campaign donations or lobbyists. Land was the currency of power. You see, the Roman Republic and later, the Empire, was an agrarian society at its core. The patrician class, the elite of Roman society, owned sprawling estates that were more like agricultural empires. These weren't your average backyard veggie patches. We're talking thousands of hectares, vast latifundia that stretched as far as the eye could see. These estates weren't just about producing food, they were the backbone of wealth and influence. Now, let's throw some numbers into this mix. By the late Republic, around 2% of the population controlled over 80% of the land. That's right, a tiny sliver of society held the keys to the kingdom, while the other 98% were left scrambling for crumbs. It's like an ancient precursor to the 1% debate, only with togas and laurel wreaths. This concentration of land wasn't just about economics, it was a political strategy. Senators and wealthy elites used their wealth to curry favor, influence elections, and secure positions of power. In Rome, the political and the agrarian were inextricably linked. It was a classic tale of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, with land as the ultimate back-scratcher. But while the elite were busy building their agrarian empires, what about the Roman peasants? Those hard-working souls toiling away in the fields, trying to eke out a living while the rich got richer. The disparity between the elite and the working class was as stark as a Roman toga against a dusty backdrop. Let's talk about the life of a Roman peasant, if you can call it a life. Most of them were tenant farmers or smallholders, working land they didn't own and paying rent to the very elites who controlled their fate. Think of them as the original gig workers, minus the digital platforms, and with a lot more manual labor. Peasants were caught in a relentless cycle of debt and poverty. The moment they started to get ahead, something, be it a bad harvest, a new tax, or an unscrupulous landlord, would knock them back down again. These folks didn't have savings accounts or safety nets. They were living hand to mouth, with one eye always on the horizon for the next disaster. And disaster wasn't a rare visitor. In a world where the weather was as unpredictable as a Roman emperor's moods, a bad season could mean the difference between survival and starvation. The Roman government wasn't exactly a bastion of support for these struggling farmers. While the elite enjoyed tax breaks and subsidies, the peasants bore the brunt of taxation. They were the ones footing the bill for Rome's insatiable appetite for expansion and conquest. Taxes came in all shapes and sizes, from property taxes to a grain tithe that took a hefty chunk of their harvest. It was like being trapped in an endless game of whack-a-mole, with the government holding the mallet. And let's not forget the role of the Roman military in this grand agricultural tapestry. Service in the legions was both a duty and a path to potential land ownership. Veterans were often rewarded with plots of land upon retirement, a policy that served Rome's dual needs of rewarding service and securing the empire's frontiers. But here's the kicker. These plots were often carved out of conquered lands, reinforcing the cycle of conquest, colonization, and agricultural expansion. The military was an engine of both destruction and creation, reshaping the landscape and the social hierarchy in its wake. The allure of land ownership was so potent that many Roman citizens willingly traded their liberty for the promise of a plot. It was a Faustian bargain, with the empire as the devil offering up land in exchange for service. The promise of land ownership was a powerful motivator, a carrot dangled before soldiers and citizens alike. It was a testament to the enduring power of land as a symbol of stability and prosperity in an otherwise tumultuous world. Meanwhile, the social ramifications of this agrarian system were profound. The divide between the patricians and the plebeians was not just about wealth, it was about access to power and opportunity. The elite could afford education, political connections, and the luxury of leisure luxuries that were as out of reach for the average peasant as the stars in the Roman sky. The plebeians, on the other hand, were often consigned to a life of labour, with little hope of climbing the social ladder. But let's not sugarcoat it, the Roman elite were masters of spin. They knew how to play the game, using their wealth to construct an image of benevolence and civic duty. Patronage was the name of the game, with wealthy Romans acting as patrons to their less fortunate clients. It was a system of mutual obligation, where the patron provided protection and support in exchange for loyalty and service. It might sound like a win-win, but make no mistake, the scales were firmly tipped in favour of the patron. In this world of land and power, the latifundia represented not just economic might, but social dominance. These vast estates were like small kingdoms, with the landowner as the undisputed ruler. The peasants and slaves who worked the land were little more than serfs, bound to the soil by necessity and circumstance. The latifundia were a microcosm of Roman society, with a stark divide between the haves and the have-nots, a divide that was both reinforced and perpetuated by Rome's agrarian system. The political implications of this system were monumental. The concentration of land and wealth in the hands of a few created an oligarchy that was as entrenched as it was powerful. The Roman Senate, ostensibly a body of equals, was in reality dominated by a few powerful families who wielded disproportionate influence. This concentration of power was both a strength and a vulnerability, a testament to the enduring power of land as a political and social tool. Yet despite the inequities and injustices, the system endured. It was a testament to the resilience of both the Roman people and the Roman state, a system that was as flawed as it was formidable. As we continue to peel back the layers of this complex tapestry, we'll delve deeper into the political machinations and social dynamics that defined Roman agriculture and, by extension, the Roman world. The story is far from over, and there are still many truths to uncover in the tale of Rome's rise and fall. Stay tuned for more revelations as we continue to explore the fascinating world of ancient Roman agriculture. And speaking of grand narratives, let's pivot from the dusty fields of Rome's countryside to the bustling arteries of its economy, those glorious trade routes and market structures that kept the empire's heart beating. You see, Rome's agricultural success wasn't just about what they could grow, but also about where they could sell it. The Romans were masters at turning humble produce into a sprawling economic juggernaut, and they did it all without a single PowerPoint presentation. First, let's talk trade routes. Picture the Roman Empire as a giant spider, with its web stretching across Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. These were no ordinary threads, though. They were the highways of commerce, teeming with merchants, traders, and the occasional bandit. The Romans were savvy enough to understand that controlling these routes was akin to having a stranglehold on the ancient world's economy. They built roads so straight that even a modern surveyor would be impressed, spanning over 250,000 miles by some estimates. That's like circling the earth 10 times. Now, these roads weren't just there for the legions to march on, although that was a nice bonus. They were the Amazon Prime of their day, allowing goods to flow quickly and efficiently. Wheat from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, and wine from Gaul were all just a chariot ride away from the bustling markets of Rome. And while the roads were the veins, the Mediterranean Sea was the empire's mighty aorta. The Romans called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. And they dominated it with a fleet that would make any naval commander drool. The Romans' knack for logistics didn't stop at moving goods. They were also adept at setting up shop. Enter the Roman Forum, the ancient equivalent of a shopping mall, only with fewer food courts and more statues of emperors. These were the beating hearts of Roman towns, where farmers and traders hawked their goods to citizens eager for the latest in olive oils and spices. The market structures were as varied as the goods they sold, ranging from bustling urban centres to quiet rural fairs. But let's not romanticize too much. While the market scene might evoke images of charming stalls and quaint bartering, the reality was more akin to a Wall Street trading floor, chaotic, loud, and utterly ruthless. Prices were subject to the whims of supply and demand, as well as the occasional bout of Roman greed. It was a place where fortunes could be made or lost faster than you could say caveat emptor. And here lies the myth-busting moment. The idea of Rome as a self-sustaining empire is about as realistic as a toga made of silk. The Romans relied heavily on imported goods to keep their citizens fed and their armies marching. For example, the famed Egyptian grain was a staple in Roman diets. The fertile lands of the Nile Delta were the breadbasket of the empire, shipping thousands of tons of wheat annually to Rome. The import of this grain was so critical that the Roman state took direct control of its distribution, using it as a tool for political stability and control. Bread and circuses indeed. But it wasn't just grain. Rome's insatiable appetite extended to other goods as well. Spices from the east, silk from China, and amber from the Baltic were all part of the Roman shopping list. These exotic imports were the ancient equivalent of luxury goods, flaunted by the wealthy as symbols of their status and sophistication. And just like today, the allure of these luxuries was enough to drive an economy. The Roman elite was as fond of their imported silks and spices as a modern influencer is of their designer handbags. However, this reliance on imports exposed a vulnerability in Rome's economic armour. In a world where a single shipwreck or a bad harvest in a distant land could send shockwaves through the market, Rome's economic stability was precariously balanced on a knife's edge. It was a lesson in overdependence that future empires would do well to heed. Yet, despite this reliance on foreign resources, the myth of Rome as a mighty, self-sufficient entity persists, not unlike the modern myth of the self-made billionaire. It's a narrative that glosses over the interconnectedness and interdependency that were the true foundations of Roman strength. The empire was more of a collaborative effort than a solitary triumph, a testament to the power of trade, diplomacy, and a little bit of good old-fashioned Roman ingenuity. But let's not get too cozy with this romantic notion of a globalized Roman economy. The benefits of trade were not evenly distributed. Just like those sprawling latifundia, the economic benefits were concentrated in the hands of the few. The wealthy merchants and landowners reaped the rewards, while the average Roman citizen was left hoping that their bread wouldn't be too stale. So, as we chart the course of Rome's economic landscape, remember that its agricultural prowess was not an isolated achievement. It was a cog in a much larger machine, one that relied on the ebb and flow of trade routes and the bustling energy of market squares. The Romans may have been architects of their own destiny, but they were also savvy players in a global game, trading wheat and wine for silk and spices, and building an empire on the backs of farmers, slaves, and merchants alike. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this intricate tapestry of commerce and conquest, exploring how these economic forces intertwine with the political machinations of Rome, setting the stage for both its zenith and its eventual decline. The story of Rome's rise isn't just about emperors and legions, it's about the farmers, traders, and everyday citizens who fueled the fires of empire with their toil and trade. There's still much more to uncover, so keep those sandals laced and your eyes on the horizon. The journey through Rome's agricultural and economic saga is far from over. And as our journey through Rome's intricate economic saga winds to a close, it's time to tackle the not-so-glamorous chapter, the decline of Roman agricultural practices. Yes, even the mightiest empires have their Achilles heel, and for Rome it was their agricultural system. It was a slow burn, not an overnight disaster like a bad date or a surprise toga malfunction. The decline was more like watching a once glorious chariot race gradually turn into a leisurely donkey trot. But what caused this agricultural powerhouse to falter? Well, grab your metaphorical farming tools because we're about to dig in. To start, let's talk about soil exhaustion. Remember that crop rotation we waxed poetic about earlier? Well, it turns out that even the Romans' savvy soil management had its limits. Over centuries, relentless farming without adequate breaks led to soil degradation. The land was like a marathon runner forced to sprint without a water break. By the time the Roman Empire was wobbling on its last legs, many fields were as barren as a senator's promise. And when the land stops producing, the bread basket becomes more of a breadcrumb. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a recipe for disaster in an empire dependent on its agricultural output to feed its ever-hungry populace. But wait, there's more. Let's throw in a dash of climate change. Yes, even the ancients weren't immune to nature's whims. Around the 3rd century AD, the climate began to shift, becoming cooler and wetter. It's like Mother Nature decided she was bored and wanted to play a different tune. This climate change, known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age, turned previously fertile lands into soggy messes, ruining harvests and shaking up the empire's food supply. And when your empire's diet relies on steady grain imports, a bad harvest wasn't just a bummer, it was a full-blown crisis. Of course, we can't ignore the elephant, or should we say, the barbarian in the room. As Rome's political stability wavered, so did its control over those vital trade routes and territories. The empire's borders were as secure as a cardboard shield, and invasions by Goths, Vandals, and other tribes disrupted the agricultural heartlands of the empire. Imagine waking up one morning to find your farm overrun by unwelcome guests who aren't exactly there for a friendly chat. This constant state of flux wreaked havoc on the agricultural economy, further exacerbating the empire's decline. Economics played its part too. The concentration of wealth and land in the hands of a few wealthy elites created a system as stable as a three-legged stool. When these landowners faced economic pressures, they often abandoned their estates, leaving once thriving farms to rot. It's as if the wealthy were playing a game of agricultural monopoly, and when they lost interest, the board was left in shambles. This abandonment wasn't just a local issue, it was a systemic collapse that rippled through the empire's economy like a stone tossed into a pond. Yet, despite these setbacks, Roman agricultural innovations left an indelible mark on modern farming techniques. Crop rotation, irrigation, and even the basic tools, like that beastly aratrum, laid the groundwork for agricultural practices that would endure long after the empire's fall. The Romans were like the original open-source developers, sharing their agricultural code with the world. Their techniques spread far and wide, influencing medieval European agriculture and beyond. It's like they wrote the first draft of the farming playbook that we're still editing today. And let's not forget the Roman knack for infrastructure. Their roads and aqueducts weren't just for show, they were the logistical backbone that allowed for the efficient movement of goods and resources. Many of these roads became the foundations of modern highways, a testament to Roman engineering prowess. It's as if the Romans left behind a blueprint for future generations, whispering through the centuries, "Here's how you do it, folks." But what lessons do these ancient agricultural practices offer us today? First, the importance of sustainable farming. The Romans learnt the hard way that you can't push the land beyond its limits without consequences, a lesson that echoes in today's debates about sustainability and environmental impact. Secondly, the value of resilience and adaptability. The Romans may have stumbled, but their initial innovations were born from necessity and ingenuity. In a world where climate change and resource scarcity loom large, those same qualities are key to overcoming contemporary challenges. As we wrap up our exploration of Roman agriculture, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to the unsung heroes, the farmers, the slaves, the traders. They were the lifeblood of an empire that, for all its grandeur, was ultimately a house of cards. Rome's agricultural legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of innovation, exploitation, and resilience. It's a story that reminds us that even the mightiest empires are only as strong as the hands that till the soil. So, as we bid farewell to the fields of ancient Rome, let's carry forward the lessons of their triumphs and tribulations. Because in the end, history isn't just about what happened, it's about what we learn from it. Whether you're a farmer, a historian, or just someone with a curiosity for the past, the echoes of Rome's agricultural saga continue to resonate, offering both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. And who knows? Maybe the next great agricultural revolution is just around the corner, waiting for someone to dust off those old Roman scrolls and plant the seeds of innovation anew. Welcome to another glorious morning in 6th century Gaul, where the sun rises over fields that haven't seen a Starbucks in centuries. You're a Frankish warrior, and let me tell you, your life is probably less Game of Thrones and more "Where's my shoe?" than you might think. Let's kick off this day with a look at your morning routine, which doesn't involve scrolling through your medieval Instagram feed because, spoiler alert, it's the 500s, and the only scroll you've got is made of parchment. You wake up on a straw mattress that makes those budget hotel beds look like a 5-star experience. Your room is dimly lit, not by choice but because windows are basically just holes in the wall with wooden shutters. No glass here, folks. You roll out of bed, careful not to step on anything sharp like that sword you casually left lying around last night. After all, safety first, right? Breakfast is the first order of business. Now, if you're expecting bacon and eggs, think again. Your morning spread is more likely to consist of some hearty porridge or, if you're living the high life, a chunk of bread. And by bread, I mean a dense, chewy loaf that would double as a weapon if needed. But hey, at least it's filling. Let's talk about what you're wearing, because fashion in Merovingian Gaul is less about style and more about not freezing to death. Your tunic, probably made of wool, is the medieval equivalent of a cozy hoodie. It's practical, durable, and perfect for a day of pillaging or, just hanging out. Over that, you might have a cloak secured with a brooch. If you're feeling fancy, the brooch might even be made of bronze, a real splurge considering the economic backdrop. And speaking of economics, let's dive into what makes this era tick. In 6th century Gaul, the economy runs on agriculture, with a little bit of trade thrown in for good measure. The Merovingian dynasty, with their long hair and penchant for war, have a firm grip on the land. Land equals power, and power equals more land. It's a vicious cycle of medieval real estate. Your armor, if you can afford it, is a prized possession. A decent set of armor can cost a small fortune, and most warriors only have the essentials, a helmet and a shield. Maybe a chainmail shirt if you're really rolling in it. Chainmail is the medieval equivalent of the latest iPhone. Everyone wants it, but not everyone can afford it. So, you make do with what you have, maybe patching up your gear when it gets too many holes. The helmet is crucial. It protects your noggin from any surprise axe swings at those weekend skirmishes. Now, let's not forget your shoes. In the grand scheme of Frankish fashion, a good pair of shoes is more than just practical. It's a status symbol. Leather is expensive, and if you're strutting around in a sturdy pair of shoes, you're basically the medieval version of a runway model. Shoes tell the world you're a person of means, someone who can afford the finer things in life, like not getting tetanus from stepping on a rusty nail. But why are shoes such a big deal? It all comes down to the trade networks. Leather has to be sourced, tanned, and crafted, which means a lot of hands touch your shoes before they grace your feet. This makes a good pair of shoes as much a symbol of economic power as they are a practical necessity. Now, as you finish your breakfast and strap on your footwear, it's time to think about the day ahead. Maybe you've got a battle to fight or a field to tend. Whatever your plans, remember that life as a Frankish warrior is unpredictable. One moment you're enjoying a quiet morning, the next you're defending your land from a neighbouring tribe or dealing with the latest edict from the Merovingian court. It's a world where alliances shift faster than you can say Clovis. And speaking of Clovis, let's remember that the Merovingian kings are more than just long-haired rulers with impressive genealogies. They are the powerhouses of this era, balancing warfare and politics with the grace of a bull in a china shop. Their influence extends beyond the battlefield, shaping the very landscape of Gaul with each strategic marriage and alliance. As you step out into the world, take a moment to appreciate the hustle and bustle of village life. The market is alive with traders, selling everything from livestock to pottery. The air is thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of deals being struck. This is the economic heartbeat of Gaul, where fortunes are made and lost in a single transaction. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life in 6th century Gaul is rough. Disease is rampant, and medical care is rudimentary at best. Your best bet for surviving an illness might just be a strong constitution and a bit of luck. And yet, despite the hardships, there's a resilience to the people here, a determination to carve out a life in a world that's often unforgiving. So as you go about your day, remember that being a Frankish warrior isn't just about swinging a sword or wearing a shiny helmet. It's about navigating a complex web of social, economic, and political challenges with whatever resources you have. It's about finding your place in a world that demands strength, cunning, and a decent pair of shoes. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, you prepare to face whatever the day throws at you. Whether it's a skirmish or a trade negotiation, you're ready. Because in this world, the only certainty is uncertainty, and the only way to survive is to adapt, improvise, and keep moving forward, preferably in those snazzy shoes of yours. As the sun continues its majestic climb, you saunter through the bustling marketplace, where the chatter of traders mingles with the clamour of livestock and the occasional planking of metal wares. Ah, the market. A microcosm of Merovingian Gaul's chaotic charm. It's here, amidst the earthy smells and haggling shouts, that the real political intrigue begins to unfold, like a medieval soap opera sans the dramatic soundtrack. First, let's set the stage with our leading actors, the Merovingian kings. Picture this, a dynasty so entangled in family drama that even the most seasoned daytime TV writers would struggle to keep up. These kings, led by the illustrious Clovis I at the start of the 6th century, have more branches on their family tree than a particularly ambitious oak. Marriages, alliances, betrayals. It's all part of the game, and the stakes are nothing short of the entire Frankish realm. Now, you might think of these kings as grand figures draped in gold and power, but let's debunk that myth right here. Their power is often more precarious than it appears. You see, each king rules over his own chunk of territory, and unity is about as consistent as a medieval plumbing system, non-existent. It's more a loose confederation of squabbling siblings, each vying for a bigger slice of the Frankish pie. Speaking of pie, the Frankish warrior like yourself plays a pivotal role in this power game. Your loyalty is the currency of the realm, and it's traded as frequently as those overpriced clay pots at the market. Imagine being a pawn in a giant chess game where the board is made of land and the players are nobles with more ambition than sense. Your allegiance could shift as quickly as the tides, dictated by the whims of whoever holds the most power or, quite frankly, whoever offers the best perks, like land, protection, or a really nice set of chainmail. And here's where it gets juicy. The Merovingians love a good feud. Clovis. I may have united the Frankish tribes with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, but his descendants are more into sibling rivalries. Think of King Chilperic I and his brother Sigebert I, their disputes as legendary as they are destructive. It's less about grand battles and more about tactical skirmishes and underhanded schemes. In modern office terms, it's the equivalent of that passive-aggressive email thread that just won't die. But why should you care about this royal squabbling? Well, because your survival might depend on aligning with the right faction at the right time. Choose wrong, and you could end up on the sharp end of a political coup, or worse, out of favour, which in this era is a fate almost as dire as losing Wi-Fi today. As a warrior, your service to these kings is as much about protecting your own skin as it is about noble ideals. It's a dance of pragmatism and allegiance, where every step must be carefully considered. The political landscape in 6th century Gaul is, quite frankly, a hot mess. Picture a map riddled with tiny kingdoms, each with its own ruler, customs, and ambitions. It's not just the Merovingians you have to watch out for. There are rival tribes, rogue bandits, and the ever-present threat of invasion from neighbouring lands. It's like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. One wrong move, and everything goes up in flames. Yet, amidst this chaos, there's a certain allure. The legends of chivalric knights and noble kings persist because they offer a romantic escape from the gritty reality. Who wouldn't want to believe in a world where valour and honour reign supreme, even if the truth is more about strategic marriages and land grabs? It's the human condition, really, our penchant for turning the mundane into myth, the ordinary into extraordinary. Back to the market, where the political gossip is as ripe as the produce. Here, every trader has a story, every transaction a potential alliance. You overhear a vendor discuss the latest skirmish between rival factions, his words weaving the web of alliances and betrayals that define your world. It's like a live-action news feed, complete with commentary and the occasional embellishment. As you navigate this marketplace of politics and goods, remember that every decision you make echoes through the halls of power, your loyalty, your service, your very life. It's all part of a grander scheme, one that transcends the simple act of buying and selling. Whether you're haggling over the price of a pig or swearing fealty to a king, it's all part of the same complex tapestry. So, as you meander past stalls piled high with grain and traders hawking their wares, take a moment to appreciate the intricate dance of survival and politics that defines your world. It's a dance that's been choreographed over generations, set to the rhythm of conquest and compromise. And while you may not have all the moves down just yet, you're certainly learning the steps, because in the world of the Merovingians, the only thing more unpredictable than the weather is the political climate, and that's saying something. As you weave through the bustling marketplace, the smell of roasting meat and freshly baked bread teases your nostrils, reminding you that it's nearly lunchtime. But before you can dig into that tantalizing stew, let's take a detour into the world of 6th century military strategy, where preparing for battle is more like organizing a medieval yard sale than staging a Hollywood epic. First things first, forget everything you know about military precision. Battles in this era are not meticulously choreographed affairs. They're more like chaotic family reunions where someone inevitably starts a brawl. Sure, there are strategies, but they're often as flexible as a blacksmith's anvil. The goal is simple: outsmart, outmaneuver, and outlast your opponent, preferably with all limbs intact. Now, let's talk weaponry. As a Frankish warrior, your arsenal is both your pride and your paycheck. If you're lucky, you've got a trusty spatha, a straight, double-edged sword that's as versatile as it is deadly. It's not Excalibur, but it'll do the job. For those who can't afford such luxuries, there's always the trusty axe, a multi-tool of medieval warfare. It chops, it cleaves, it even hammers if you're in a pinch. Shields are crucial too, often made of wood with an iron boss at the center. They're less about heroically blocking arrows and more about not getting skewered by a neighbor's spear. Speaking of spears, they're the medieval equivalent of a Swiss army knife. Long, pointy, and perfect for keeping enemies at bay. The Frankish spear, or angon, is particularly feared, with a barb designed to stick in shields and make them unwieldy, because nothing says battlefield prowess like turning your opponent's defense into a liability. But it's not just about the weapons, it's about how you use them. The Frankish battle tactic of choice? The wedge formation? Imagine a flying V, but with more spears and significantly less ice. This formation focuses the attack on a single point, breaking through enemy lines like a hot knife through buttered porridge. It's effective, brutal, and, when executed correctly, a sight to behold. And let's not forget the logistics. Moving an army in the 6th century is less March of the Penguins and more Herd of Cats. Without the luxury of smartphones or GPS, you're relying on scouts who know the land like the back of their hand, or at least pretend to. Distances aren't measured in miles but in days, and maps are more suggestion than gospel. You navigate by landmarks, rivers, and the occasional helpful peasant who points you in the right direction, assuming they're not leading you into an ambush. Now, let's address the culinary elephant in the room, army food. The biggest threat to a soldier's life might not be a battle axe, but the camp cook's stew. Made from whatever's on hand, it's a concoction of meat, grains, and whatever vegetables haven't rotted. If you're lucky, it's merely bland. If not, well, let's just say the latrines will be busy. Food poisoning is a real concern, and the last thing you want is to charge into battle with a stomach rebellion of your own. On top of that, there's the small matter of supply lines. Keeping an army fed and watered is no small feat. You can't just pop down to the medieval equivalent of a 7-Eleven. Instead, you're foraging, requisitioning from local villages, or, let's be honest, pillaging. It's a logistical nightmare, and if your supply chain fails, it doesn't matter how sharp your sword is, you'll be too weak to lift it. Strategically, the Frankish approach to warfare is a mix of brute force and opportunism. It's about seizing the moment, exploiting weaknesses, and knowing when to retreat. There's no shame in living to fight another day, especially when tomorrow's battle might have a more favorable terrain or a less formidable opponent. As you contemplate these martial realities, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings through the air, a reminder that preparation is as much about maintenance as it is about strategy. Weapons need sharpening, armor needs mending, and morale needs boosting. A well-prepared army is like a well-oiled machine, except this machine runs on adrenaline, honor, and the occasional swig of ale. So, as you prepare to tuck into that meat stew, remember that every bite is a reminder of the delicate balance between survival and strategy. In this world, success is measured not just by victories on the battlefield, but by the ability to endure the everyday chaos that defines life as a Frankish warrior. The stakes are high, the odds unpredictable, and the rewards, well, they might just be worth the risk. But for now, let's hope the stew is as palatable as it smells. As you savor that stew, attempting to identify the mystery meat while hoping it won't lead to an impromptu session at the latrines, let's dive into the intoxicating world of medieval PR, where the truth was as flexible as a bard's lute string. You see, in 6th century Gaul, the line between fact and fiction was blurrier than your vision after a night at the local mead hall. Just like today's Instagram influencers, the Merovingian kings knew the power of a good story. And speaking of stories, let's talk Clovis I. Now, if you've heard of him, you've probably heard the tale, the mighty king who single-handedly united the Franks and converted to Christianity after a divine vision. Sounds like something straight out of a medieval blockbuster, right? Cue the dramatic music and heavenly light. But let's pump the brakes on this chariot of legend. The reality, Clovis's conversion, was less about celestial intervention and more about political maneuvering. In fact, it was as much about securing alliances as it was about securing souls. Think of it as a strategic rebranding exercise with the cross as his new logo. Here's the scoop. Around 496 AD, Clovis supposedly saw the light after a battlefield prayer led to victory. But hold on, this wasn't just any battle. This was the Battle of Tolbiac against the Alemanni. Clovis knew that aligning with the influential Roman Catholic Church could expand his influence and legitimize his rule over the diverse tribes of his realm. Baptizing his army was like hitting the follow button on the Roman Empire's social media account, gaining both clout and credibility. And let's not forget the role of his wife, Clotilda. A Burgundian princess and devout Christian, she wasn't just a pretty face in a tapestry. She was the medieval equivalent of a social media manager, nudging Clovis towards a brand makeover that would open doors to alliances and support from the Gallo-Roman aristocracy. But why stop at Clovis? The Merovingians as a whole were masters of spin. Take the bards, for instance. These were the original content creators, crafting epic sagas that turned every skirmish into a heroic tale and every royal decree into divine wisdom. They were like the ancient world's travel bloggers, except their journeys involved more swords and fewer sunsets. Their songs were the medieval newsfeed, spreading tales of valor and conquest faster than a pigeon with a caffeine rush. These stories weren't just for entertainment. They were carefully curated narratives designed to boost morale, ensure loyalty, and maintain the social order. A bard's tale could elevate a warrior's status from mere soldier to legendary hero, ensuring his family's place in the social hierarchy. Think of it as medieval LinkedIn endorsements, but with more blood and less bureaucracy. But let's debunk another myth. Not every warrior was a shining knight. The Frankish warriors were often more thug than noble, their exploits exaggerated to the point of parody. Imagine a gritty reboot of Robin Hood, where the heroes are more interested in plunder than justice. Yet these tales endured because they offered an escape from the grim reality, a world where life was short, violent, and disease-ridden. The legends provided hope, a belief that heroism could transcend the mundane drudgery of daily life. Now, let's talk about the economic angle, because nothing says legendary like a well-funded campaign. The Merovingians knew that to maintain power they needed more than just brawn, they needed coin. And coin was earned through land, trade, and, let's be honest, the occasional bout of strategic pillaging. Picture a medieval Kickstarter, but instead of funding gadgets, you're funding wars and feasts. These resources fueled the bard's stories, ensuring that the king's exploits were heard far and wide. But here's the kicker. Not everyone was buying what the bards were selling. Some skeptics, the medieval equivalent of today's fact-checkers, saw through the hyperbole. Yet, without Instagram to validate their cynicism, they often found themselves drowned out by the more appealing narrative of divine right and destined rulers. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the fields, you begin to see how the myths of heroism were as much about survival as they were about storytelling. They were a necessary illusion, a way to rally people under a common banner, to inspire loyalty and bravery in a world that offered little else. In essence, these myths were the glue that held the fragile tapestry of society together. So, as you finish your meal and prepare for the evening's duties, remember that while the legends offer a romanticized view of the past, the truth is far more complex. It's a story of power, politics, and the human desire to find meaning in chaos. The myths persist not because they're true, but because they offer a glimpse of what could be, a world where valor conquers all, and where the humble warrior might just become a hero. In the end, the tales of Frankish heroism are a reminder of the power of narrative, a testament to humanity's enduring need to create stories that elevate the ordinary to the extraordinary. Whether it's Clovis's divine conversion or a bard's embellished ballad, these stories are the echoes of a time when the pen and the sword were mightier than any truth. And as the last light fades, leaving only the flicker of torchlight to guide your weary feet back to the encampment, let's unravel the tangled threads of Frankish society, where the social order is as intricate as a tapestry and twice as prone to unraveling. It's a world where warriors like you don't just swing swords, but also wield influence, shaping everything from art to the very laws that govern the land. First things first, the social structure of 6th century Gaul is about as straightforward as a Byzantine bureaucracy. At the top, you have the Merovingian kings who, despite their often dubious claims to divine right, manage to command respect, or at least fear. Below them are the nobility, the magnates who own vast swaths of land and, by extension, the people who live on it. Think of them as the medieval version of corporate overlords, minus the PowerPoint presentations. Then there's you, the warrior class, standing somewhere between the nobility and the common folk. Your role isn't just about bashing skulls, it's about maintaining the social order. You're the enforcers of the king's peace, the medieval equivalent of neighborhood watch, except your meetings are more likely to end in a skirmish than a potluck dinner. Your influence extends beyond the battlefield and into the cultural realm. Art in Frankish society is a reflection of its warrior ethos, with intricate designs adorning everything from weapons to jewelry. The famous Sutton Hoo helmet, found in England but influenced by Frankish designs, is a testament to this warrior artistry, a masterpiece of iron and silver designed to protect and intimidate. It's a reminder that even in warfare, beauty can find a place, albeit a somewhat blood-stained one. But let's not sugarcoat it. The law is where things get truly interesting. The Salic law, attributed to the Merovingians, is a fascinating blend of Roman legal principles and Germanic customs. It's a legal code that covers everything from murder to the theft of bees. Yes, bees. Lose a hive, and you could find yourself compensating the victim with a hefty fine. It's like Judge Judy meets Game of Thrones, with penalties meticulously priced in solidi, the gold coins of the realm. This code isn't just about justice, it's about control. By codifying laws, the Merovingians solidify their authority, ensuring that everyone knows the rules and the consequences of breaking them. But here's the kicker. The Salic law famously excludes women from inheriting land, a decision that will echo through history like a particularly stubborn echo in a medieval hall. It's a reminder that while the law might be set in stone, it's often as flexible as the rulers who enforce it. So, how does your day-to-day life influence this grand narrative? Well, as a warrior, you're not just a cog in the machine, you're a vital part of its operation. Your loyalty and service are the glue that holds this society together, ensuring that the king's decrees are more than just words on parchment. It's a role that carries both prestige and peril, balancing the promise of land and reward against the ever-present risk of betrayal or defeat. And as the night deepens, casting long shadows over the campfires, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of the Franks. Their influence extends far beyond the borders of Gaul, shaping the very fabric of medieval Europe. From the spread of Christianity to the establishment of feudalism, the Franks are the architects of a world that will endure for centuries. Yet, it's easy to get lost in the romance of it all, to imagine a world of noble knights and chivalrous deeds. But the reality, as we've seen, is far grittier. It's a world where survival often trumps honor, and where the line between hero and villain is as thin as a sword's edge. The legacy of the Franks is not just one of conquest and power, it's also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. So, what if the storytellers had focused less on the glamour and more on the grit? Perhaps history would paint a different picture, one where the everyday struggles of people like you take center stage. It's a story of resilience, of finding meaning in the mundane, of carving out a life in a world that often seems determined to grind you down. And as you settle in for the night, listening to the distant hum of the camp as it drifts into slumber, consider this. The true legacy of the Franks isn't just in the monuments they built or the battles they won. It's in the stories they left behind, the myths and legends that, for all their embellishments, speak to the universal truths of human experience. These tales, spun by bards and chroniclers, serve as both entertainment and education. They're the bedtime stories of a bygone era, offering comfort and inspiration to those who hear them. They remind us that history isn't just about the victors, it's about the people who lived, loved, and fought in the shadows of greatness. As you drift off to sleep, let the echoes of those stories guide your dreams. Because in the end, the legacy of the Franks is a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives, each one contributing to the rich and complex fabric of history. And perhaps, as you close your eyes, you'll find your own place within that tapestry, a reminder that even the smallest thread can have a lasting impact. In a world where selfies and Instagram filters are the norm, it's refreshing to remember that Leonardo da Vinci was sketching the human condition with nothing more than charcoal and genius over 500 years ago. Born in 4050 in the Tuscan hill town of Vinci, yes, that's where he got the snazzy last name, Leonardo was the illegitimate son of a notary and a peasant woman. An unlikely start for a man whose name would one day be synonymous with Renaissance man. Growing up, Leonardo had a curious mind that was as restless as a caffeinated squirrel. He wasn't exactly school material. He preferred drawing birds and landscapes over the dull recitations of Latin grammar. But this wasn't just childhood doodling. His talent was so impressive that by the age of 14, his father recognized the spark of genius and whisked him off to Florence, the Silicon Valley of the Renaissance era. This was a city bursting with art, commerce, and enough political intrigue to make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. Leonardo found himself apprenticed to Andrea del Verrocchio, a jack-of-all-trades artist who could paint, sculpt, and probably make a mean lasagna. Under Verrocchio's wing, young Leonardo learned everything from the basics of painting and sculpture to the intricacies of engineering. Yes, this was a man who could paint a masterpiece and then design a machine to hang it up. Florence in the late 15th century was a hotbed of creativity and, let's not sugarcoat it, chaos. The Medici family, the real-life mafia dons of the Renaissance, controlled the city's politics and economy with a velvet-gloved iron fist. It was a time when being an artist meant pleasing the whims of your patrons, which often involved more smiling and nodding than actual creating. If you've ever worked in customer service, you get the picture. Leonardo's first taste of this came with his work on The Baptism of Christ, where he painted an angel so stunning that Verrocchio allegedly vowed never to paint again. Of course, this might just be Renaissance gossip, but Leonardo's talent was undeniable. Yet, like many artists, he found himself at the mercy of patrons who paid late or not at all. Imagine trying to feed your artistic soul while your stomach growls louder than the crowds in the Piazza della Signoria. In this era, Leonardo began to sketch out his first inventions. Now, Leonardo's notebooks were like the Renaissance version of a Reddit rabbit hole. Once you started, you couldn't stop. His mind was a whirlwind of ideas, from flying machines to giant crossbows. But here's the kicker. Most of these inventions never saw the light of day. Why? Well, turning a dream into reality in the 15th century wasn't as easy as a Kickstarter campaign. Materials were costly, and skilled labor was hard to come by. Not to mention, the technology of the time was about as advanced as a modern-day potato peeler. One of his early designs was the ornithopter, a flying machine inspired by the mechanics of bird wings. The idea was brilliant. If, by brilliant, you mean terrifyingly impractical. The machine required a human to flap wings with the vigor of an Olympic rower, which sounds more like a medieval torture device than a means of air travel. Leonardo's genius was boundless, but even he couldn't defy the laws of physics with parchment and ink. Then there was the giant crossbow, a weapon so large it made a regular crossbow look like a cocktail toothpick. This design was supposedly meant to scare enemies into submission rather than be fired. Imagine seeing a siege weapon the size of a small barn rolling toward you. You'd probably rethink your life choices too. Yet, like many of Leonardo's other designs, it stayed on paper. The cost and labor required to build such a monstrosity were prohibitive, and it turns out that was a recurring theme in his life. Leonardo's sketchbooks were his playground, filled with ideas that were ahead of their time by centuries. But the gap between vision and reality was wide, and Renaissance Italy wasn't exactly a land of endless opportunities. Economic and political instability meant that projects were often started with enthusiasm and then abandoned with a sigh. It was a time when being a genius came with its own set of frustrations, not least of which was dealing with bureaucratic hurdles that would make today's DMV look efficient. In the end, Leonardo da Vinci was a man whose mind was both a blessing and a curse. He lived in a world that wasn't quite ready for his brilliance, a land of breathtaking art and maddening limitations. Yet, despite the challenges, his sketches laid the groundwork for ideas that would one day become reality. From his early days in Florence to his later years, Leonardo's life was a testament to the power of imagination and the enduring struggle between visionary ideas and the gritty realities of the world. And while many of his dreams may have stayed on paper, they continue to inspire, reminding us that even the most far-fetched ideas can someday soar. As Leonardo packed up his brushes and bid farewell to Florence's bustling piazzas, he set his sights on Milan, a city that promised both opportunity and its own brand of chaos. It was the late 1480s, and Milan was under the thumb of Ludovico Sforza, a duke with ambitions as lofty as a Florentine cathedral. Now, Ludovico was the kind of ruler who wanted his court to be as dazzling as a Renaissance fireworks display, and Leonardo seemed like the perfect spark. In Milan, Leonardo reinvented himself, pitching his skills in a 10-page letter to Ludovico like it was the Renaissance version of LinkedIn. He touted his abilities as an architect, engineer, and painter. But it was his flair for military engineering that caught Ludovico's eye. Leonardo promised machines that could bring the art of war to new levels of magnificence and terror. This was a time when the military-industrial complex was less about contracts and more about impressing the guy with the biggest cannon. Leonardo's military designs were a curious mix of brilliance and bewilderment. Take his armoured tank, a contraption that looked like a cross between a tortoise and a UFO. Designed to be powered by men cranking handles inside, it promised to roll through battlefields like a mobile fortress. In theory, it was ingenious. In practice, it was the Renaissance equivalent of a treadmill, exhausting and going nowhere fast. Not to mention, the design had a minor flaw. The cranks were set up to move in opposite directions. Talk about running in circles. Then there was the scythed chariot, a device that would make any gladiator proud. Picture a cart with spinning blades attached to its wheels, designed to mow down enemy lines like a particularly aggressive lawnmower. It was an idea that sounded terrifying on paper, but was impractical to the point of absurdity. The battlefield was no place for precision gardening, and the chariot was more likely to take out its own crew than the opposition. Despite these hiccups, Leonardo's reputation as a military engineer grew. The allure of his designs lay not in their practicality, but in the sheer audacity of their conception. Ludovico was captivated by Leonardo's potential to blend art and warfare, even if it meant overlooking the small detail that many of these machines existed more in the realm of dreams than reality. Leonardo's designs were like blockbuster trailers, full of promise, but the full feature was often missing. But Leonardo wasn't just Ludovico's war toy designer. He was also tasked with more peaceful pursuits, like working on The Last Supper. While the Duke envisioned Leonardo as a maestro of destruction, Leonardo himself was more interested in dissecting the mechanics of life and nature, often leaving military projects to gather dust while he pondered the mysteries of the human soul on canvas. The economic context of the time added another layer of complexity to Leonardo's sojourn in Milan. The city was a thriving centre of trade and commerce, yet this prosperity was as unstable as a house of cards. Ludovico's court was flush with wealth, but much of it was borrowed or extracted through heavy taxation. Commissioning grandiose projects was one thing, finding the funds to bring them to fruition was another. Leonardo's inventions were often shelved, not for lack of ingenuity, but for lack of cash. This financial tightrope was mirrored in the political sphere. Milan was a pawn in the larger chess game of Italian politics, with Ludovico juggling alliances as deftly as he managed his court. Leonardo's position was as precarious as any courtier's, reliant on the whims of a ruler whose fortunes could change faster than a Renaissance fashion trend. Yet for all the frustrations and failures, Leonardo's time in Milan was a period of prolific output. His sketchbooks overflowed with designs that were as imaginative as they were impractical. The influence of these works would resonate far beyond the limits of 15th century technology, inspiring future generations to dream bigger and bolder. Leonardo's legacy was not in the machines he built, but in the ideas he sparked. As he navigated the treacherous waters of Milanese court life, Leonardo's reputation as a Renaissance genius continued to grow. He was a man out of time, a visionary whose dreams were too vast for the world he inhabited. Yet, in the interplay between ambition and reality, between theory and practice, Leonardo's genius found its true expression, not in the machines of war, but in the enduring power of imagination. And so, as Leonardo da Vinci continued to juggle the visionary with the impractical, the masterpiece with the unfinished sketch, we arrive at perhaps the most iconic part of his legacy, his paintings. Now, let's dive into the myth of Leonardo the painter, a title that might have more to do with mastery than with mastery. Sure, The Last Supper and Mona Lisa are the stuff of art history legend, but behind the layers of varnish and reverence, there's a mess of intrigue, impatience, and incredulity. To start, let's talk about The Last Supper, a painting with a story as dramatic as the biblical event it portrays. Commissioned by Ludovico Sforza for the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, this was Leonardo's chance to leave a mark as indelible as a Renaissance permanent marker. The year was 1495, and Leonardo was tasked with capturing the moment Jesus announces that one of his disciples will betray him. Talk about a dinner party bombshell. But here's the kicker. Leonardo wasn't exactly known for working fast. The man was a perfectionist to the point of paralysis. He took 3 years to finish what was essentially a mural, and even then, it was touch and go. Patrons were tearing their hair out while Leonardo pondered every brushstroke like it was the cure for the common cold. Legend has it, he used to stare at the wall for hours, lost in thought about the perfect expression of Judas's betrayal or Peter's shock. This was art as a marathon, not a sprint. And oh, the irony. Leonardo's experimental technique involved using tempera on dry plaster instead of the tried-and-true fresco method, which meant the painting began to degrade almost as soon as it was finished. Fast forward to today, and the original has suffered more touch-ups than a Hollywood starlet. Now, the Mona Lisa. Ah, the enigmatic smile that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. Painted between 53 and 56, this portrait of Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a Florentine merchant, is a masterclass in mystery. But before we get all misty-eyed about the legendary smirk, let's talk logistics. The painting measures a modest 30 inches by 21 inches, a fact that might surprise anyone expecting a grand canvas to match its reputation. Yet, this small rectangle has become the world's most famous painting, currently hanging in the Louvre behind thick glass, guarded as if it were the Holy Grail. What makes the Mona Lisa so special? Is it the delicate sfumato technique, blending the edges so seamlessly that the transition between light and shadow is almost imperceptible? Is it the way her eyes seem to follow you around the room like a judgmental aunt at Thanksgiving? Maybe. But let's not forget the economic context. Leonardo was paid a measly 4,000 ducats for his trouble, a sum that today wouldn't cover a luxury handbag, let alone a masterpiece. He lugged the painting around for years, unable to part with it, and it's rumoured he kept tweaking it long after it left the easel. In both cases, Leonardo's brilliance lay not just in his skill, but in his ability to imbue these works with a life of their own. The art world is obsessed with perfection, and Leonardo's paintings are hailed as paragons of this ideal. But the truth is, Leonardo's creative process was anything but tidy. His patrons frequently found themselves grappling with his glacial pace and relentless tinkering. Imagine commissioning a portrait and getting it back years later, only to find the artist still fussing over the eyebrows. That's Leonardo for you. The romantic narratives surrounding these paintings are hard to resist. The Last Supper, as a divine dinner theatre, the Mona Lisa, as a coded message from the past. But let's face it, these legends often gloss over the fact that Leonardo was a man who could procrastinate with the best of them. And while we're myth-busting, let's crack open the notion that Leonardo was a solitary genius. Yes, he was brilliant, but he was also a product of his environment, a Renaissance Italy teeming with political manoeuvring, economic pressures, and artistic rivalry. Leonardo was not alone in his genius. He was surrounded by other luminaries like Michelangelo and Raphael, each vying for the spotlight in a cultural scene as competitive as any reality TV show. In this context, art wasn't just about beauty, it was a currency, a tool for political gain and social standing. Patrons, including the powerful Medici and Sforza families, were less interested in the purity of artistic expression and more in how art could enhance their status. Leonardo's ability to navigate these murky waters speaks volumes about his acumen beyond the canvas. His economic reality was far from romantic. Leonardo often found himself chasing payments, juggling multiple projects just to make ends meet. The art world's obsession with his genius often overlooks the uncomfortable truth that many of his works were left unfinished, victims of his endless pursuit of perfection and the financial constraints of his time. This was a man who painted masterpieces while wrestling with the harsh realities of Renaissance economics. Yet, despite these challenges, Leonardo's paintings have transcended their origins, becoming cultural icons that defy the limitations of their creator's time. They've sparked debates and discussions that continue to this day, proving that while Leonardo may not have been the infallible genius of legend, his work possesses an enduring power that captivates us still. As we ponder the myth and the reality of Leonardo the painter, one thing remains clear: his legacy is as complex and layered as the works he left behind. This isn't the end of our exploration into the life of Leonardo da Vinci, far from it. We'll continue to unravel the tangled threads of his genius, his struggles, and his triumphs. Because if there's one thing Leonardo teaches us, it's that the story is never as simple as it seems, and the truth, like a masterful painting, is always worth a closer look. Yet, as we shift from Leonardo's painted masterpieces to the hidden marvels of his anatomical studies, it's clear that the Renaissance's most famous polymath was more than just a man with a brush. Leonardo da Vinci was what you might call a Renaissance biohacker, long before the term would be coined by modern-day techies. And let me tell you, his methods would make today's scientists either laugh or cry, or both. You see, Leonardo wasn't content with looking at the human form from the outside. Oh no, he had to dive in, quite literally. This man was so obsessed with understanding the human body that he went to great lengths, often quite creepy ones, to satisfy his curiosity. We're talking about a guy who would sneak into morgues under the cover of night, armed with sketchbooks and blades, eager to dissect corpses like he was cutting into a Thanksgiving turkey. If that doesn't make your dinner guests lose their appetites, I don't know what will. Now, before you start imagining Leonardo as some sort of medieval Dr. Frankenstein, let's set the stage. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, anatomical knowledge was about as advanced as a medieval map, the kind with sea monsters at the edges. Medical professionals relied heavily on the work of Galen, an ancient Greek physician whose theories were about as outdated as MySpace. Leonardo, however, was not one to follow the crowd. He wanted the real deal, and he believed the answers lay beneath the skin. So there he was, sketching away in cold, dimly lit rooms with a dedication that would put today's crime scene investigators to shame. Between 5007 and 5030, Leonardo conducted more than 30 dissections, and his notebooks from this period are nothing short of astonishing. They contain over 240 detailed drawings, accompanied by thousands of words of commentary. It's as if he'd turned his sketchbooks into the ultimate Renaissance anatomy textbook, centuries before anyone else thought to do so. And let's not forget the economic context. Performing dissections wasn't exactly a well-paying gig. In fact, it was often illegal and considered highly taboo. Yet, Leonardo's insatiable curiosity drove him to find ways around these barriers, like some sort of anatomical outlaw. He understood that knowledge was power, and in a world ruled by superstition, he was determined to illuminate the darkness with cold, hard facts, even if it meant skirting the law. Leonardo's anatomical drawings were groundbreaking, mapping out everything from the skeletal structure to the intricacies of the muscles and organs. He was the first to accurately depict the human spine and its S-curve, a detail that eluded anatomists for years. He even ventured into embryology, with sketches of fetuses that were as tender as they were scientific. Talk about multitasking. Leonardo was revolutionizing both art and science, all while his contemporaries were still trying to figure out how to properly pronounce Renaissance. But let's not sugarcoat it. Leonardo's methods were as unorthodox as they were revolutionary. He'd often describe how to carefully peel back skin or saw through bone with a level of detail that would make a butcher blush. His notebooks reveal a man who was not only a brilliant artist, but also a meticulous scientist, obsessed with capturing the reality of the human body in ways that were both beautiful and grotesque. Despite his genius, Leonardo's work in anatomy remained largely unpublished during his lifetime, gathering dust in his private collection like some sort of Renaissance secret menu. It wasn't until the 19th century, when his notebooks were rediscovered, that the world began to understand the depth of his contributions to science. This was a man who'd been centuries ahead of his time, laying the groundwork for fields that wouldn't gain traction for hundreds of years. His anatomical studies were like a hidden treasure chest, bursting with insights that modern medicine would eventually catch up to. Now, why were these groundbreaking studies left to languish in obscurity? Well, let's just say Leonardo's attention span was about as focused as a cat chasing a laser pointer. His mind was a whirlwind of ideas, and anatomy was just one of the many subjects that caught his interest. Plus, the economic reality of the time meant that his patrons weren't exactly clamouring for dissections. They wanted paintings, inventions, and designs that could be flaunted at court, practical applications that could turn heads and, more importantly, turn a profit. And then there's the social context. Renaissance Italy wasn't exactly a hub of scientific enlightenment. The church held sway over matters of life and death, and mucking about with corpses was seen as meddling with God's work. Leonardo's anatomical pursuits were a risky business, both legally and socially. He was walking a tightrope, balancing his thirst for knowledge with the need to keep his head firmly attached to his shoulders. But, oh, the romance of it all! The image of Leonardo, hunched over a dissecting table, sketching furiously by candlelight, is undeniably compelling. It's the stuff of legend, a testament to the power of curiosity and the human spirit's relentless drive to understand itself. Yet, as with all legends, there's a gritty reality beneath the surface. Leonardo's dissections were messy, controversial, and often unappreciated in his own time. His genius, like so many others, was overshadowed by the limitations and prejudices of the era. In the end, Leonardo da Vinci was a man driven by an insatiable quest for knowledge, a pursuit that led him down paths both wondrous and strange. His anatomical studies were a marriage of art and science, a testament to his belief that understanding the human body was key to understanding the human soul. And while his work may have been lost to history for centuries, its eventual rediscovery has solidified Leonardo's place not just as a master painter, but as a pioneer in the world of science. As we leave behind the dim, candlelit rooms of Leonardo's anatomical explorations, we find ourselves on the cusp of another chapter in his life, one that would take him to the courts of kings and the halls of power. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's marvel at the legacy of a man who dared to look beneath the surface, who saw the world in all its complexity and sought to capture it in lines of ink and strokes of genius. As the curtains fall on Leonardo's anatomical escapades, we find our Renaissance virtuoso at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. It's the early 16th century, and Leonardo da Vinci, the man who could turn a blank page into a masterpiece, is about to embark on the final leg of his journey, a move to France that would define his later years. Picture a world in flux, where new empires rise, old powers crumble, and the notion of a Renaissance man is as fashionable as a pair of doublet and hose. In 1516, Leonardo accepted an invitation from King Francis I of France, who was as enamored with Italian art as he was with his own reflection. The king offered Leonardo a comfortable residence at the Château du Clos-Lucé in Amboise, along with a generous stipend of 1,000 scudi per year, roughly the cost of a mid-sized Renaissance villa or a couple of dozen really good wigs. For a man who'd spent much of his life chasing payments like a Renaissance debt collector, this was nothing short of miraculous. Now, why would a man of Leonardo's calibre leave the sun-drenched hills of Italy for the rainy climes of France? Well, for starters, Italy in the 6th century was a bit like a game of geopolitical hot potato. The Italian wars had left the peninsula a patchwork of territories constantly at war, and Leonardo, never one to enjoy the sound of cannon fire over his morning espresso, saw France as a sanctuary of peace and patronage. Francis I, a king with a flair for the arts and a penchant for collecting cultural icons, welcomed Leonardo with open arms. It's said that he viewed Leonardo not just as a court painter, but as a living treasure, a walking, talking embodiment of the Renaissance spirit. The king even dubbed him the first painter, architect and engineer to the king, a title that sounds as grand as a royal banquet but came with less pressure and more creative freedom. Settled in his new home, Leonardo spent his twilight years tinkering away, surrounded by a small entourage of students and loyal servants. He continued to sketch and devise, although the grand projects of his youth had given way to more introspective pursuits. The aging polymath, now in his 60s, was plagued by paralysis in his right hand, a cruel twist of fate for a man whose life had been defined by the dexterity of his fingers. Yet, ever resourceful, he adapted by using his left hand, a skill he'd honed since childhood. Talk about a handy backup plan. Despite his physical limitations, Leonardo's mind remained as sharp as ever. He continued to draw, write, and contemplate the mysteries of the universe, leaving behind a wealth of unfinished projects and scattered notes. His notebooks, a chaotic jumble of ideas ranging from water flow to the flight of birds, were like the ultimate Renaissance mixtape, brilliant yet frustratingly incomplete. They were his legacy, a testament to a mind that refused to be boxed in by the limitations of its time. Leonardo's time in France wasn't all about solitude and sketches. He maintained a close relationship with Francis I, and legend has it that the two would spend hours discussing everything from art to science in what can only be described as the original TED Talks. Francis, captivated by Leonardo's intellect, often sought his counsel on matters of state, recognizing that, while Leonardo might not have been a wizard, he was certainly wise. But let's not romanticize it too much. Leonardo's final years weren't just a leisurely stroll through the Loire Valley. The economic reality of the time meant that money was often tight, even for a king. And the grandiose projects Leonardo had once envisioned were still hampered by the harsh realities of cost and labor. The French court, though more stable than Italy's, wasn't immune to the financial strains of maintaining a kingdom, and Leonardo's dreams of engineering marvels remained largely on paper. In 1519, after 3 years in France, Leonardo's remarkable journey came to an end. He passed away on May 2nd in the modest comfort of his French abode, reportedly in the arms of Francis I. Whether this touching scene is fact or fiction is up for debate, but it certainly adds a poetic flair to the life of a man who inspired countless tales. Upon his death, Leonardo left behind a legacy that was as much about what he didn't finish as what he did. Many of his works were scattered, his notebooks tucked away like hidden treasures waiting to be discovered. It wasn't until centuries later that his sketches and writings were unearthed, revealing the full scope of his genius. Today, they sit in museums and private collections, offering glimpses into a mind that was always a few steps ahead of its time. So why, you might ask, is Leonardo da Vinci remembered as much for his unfinished projects as for his masterpieces? The answer lies in the beauty of his ambition, the courage to dream beyond the constraints of his era. Incomplete as they were, his ideas sparked imaginations and inspired innovations that would shape the world long after he'd shuffled off his mortal coil. Leonardo's posthumous rise to mythic status is a testament to the enduring allure of a mind unchained by convention. He's become a symbol of human potential, a reminder that sometimes the journey itself is as important as the destination. In a world obsessed with completion and perfection, Leonardo's legacy is a celebration of the unfinished, a recognition that true genius is often found in the spaces between what is and what could be. And so, as we close the chapter on Leonardo da Vinci, we do so with an understanding that his story is one of paradoxes and possibilities, a man who, in his relentless pursuit of knowledge, became a legend not just for his art, but for his insatiable curiosity. His life was a tapestry of triumphs and trials, woven together by the threads of a mind that dared to defy the ordinary. In the end, Leonardo da Vinci was more than a painter, inventor, or scientist. He was a visionary whose ideas transcended the limitations of time and place, a genius whose legacy continues to inspire and challenge us to dream bigger, think deeper, and reach further. As we bid farewell to this Renaissance polymath, we do so with a nod to the unfinished, the imperfect, and the endlessly fascinating journey of a man who was all too human. In the humid, sugar-scented air of 18th century Saint-Domingue, a man named Toussaint Louverture was born, though not exactly with a silver spoon in his mouth, more like a sugarcane stalk. He arrived in the world in 1743, in a place that would eventually become Haiti, a land with more twists and turns in its story than a soap opera. But back then it was a French colony, the glittering jewel of the Caribbean, and it was all about sugar, sweet, sweet sugar, the kind that makes your dentist shake his head. Saint-Domingue was the world's leading sugar producer, rolling out about 40% of Europe's sweet cravings and 60% of its coffee needs. This powerhouse of production was built on the backs of enslaved people, and that's how Toussaint entered the scene. Born into slavery, his early life was far from the revolutionary glory that later generations would ascribe to him. Now, here's where the story takes a delightful detour from the mythic narrative. Toussaint wasn't your typical rise from the ashes hero. He wasn't leading revolutions in his teens or plotting grand schemes in his 20s. In fact, he spent a good chunk of his life managing his master's livestock on a plantation, a skill that would one day translate into strategic military genius. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The point is, he didn't exactly burst onto the scene as a revolutionary prodigy. He was more of a late bloomer, proving that sometimes greatness comes with a bit of patience and a lot of hard work. As a young man, Toussaint had a relatively privileged position for someone in his circumstances. He was literate, thanks to his godfather Pierre Baptiste, who taught him to read and write, and he even had the luxury of owning a few animals of his own. By the standards of an enslaved person, this was akin to having your own startup in Silicon Valley minus the free kombucha. But life wasn't all sunshine and sugarcane. The brutal realities of the slave system were ever present, with Sodoming's slave population facing a mortality rate so high it makes you wonder if the Grim Reaper had set up shop in the colony. Toussaint's early life was one of careful navigation. He wasn't just surviving, he was learning, adapting, and, most importantly, waiting. It wasn't until he was nearly 50, yes 50, that he took his first major step onto the political stage. At an age when most people today are grappling with midlife crises, Toussaint was gearing up to flip the colonial power structure on its head. It's almost as if he heard the ticking of the biological clock and decided to start a revolution instead of buying a sports car. In 1791, a pivotal year, the enslaved population of Saint-Domingue decided they'd had enough. Inspired by the French Revolution's ideals, liberté, égalité, fraternité, and all that jazz, they rose up in what would become the largest and most successful slave rebellion in history. But Toussaint, ever the cautious strategist, didn't jump into the fray right away. He watched, he listened, and when he finally did join the rebellion, he brought with him not just passion, but a sharp, strategic mind honed from years of managing plantation logistics. Who knew that organizing cattle could translate to commanding armies? His delayed entrance into leadership challenges the romantic image of the young, impetuous revolutionary. Toussaint was a seasoned man by the time he stepped into the spotlight, and he used every bit of his acquired wisdom to outmaneuver his opponents. He played the political game like a chess master, aligning with the Spanish, then the French, and even negotiating with the British, all while keeping his ultimate goal of emancipation firmly in sight. His story is a testament to the fact that sometimes the best leaders aren't the ones who rush to the front lines, but those who bide their time, learning every step of the way before making their move. Toussaint's rise was as much about timing as it was about talent. When he finally emerged as a leader, it wasn't with the reckless abandon of a young firebrand, but with the calculated precision of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. It's a narrative that flies in the face of the classic revolutionary tale, but it makes his story all the more compelling. He's proof that sometimes history's greatest figures are the ones who take their time, building their legacy one deliberate step at a time. So next time you're sweating a deadline or feeling pressured to achieve greatness by a certain age, just remember Toussaint Louverture, the man who showed the world that sometimes slow and steady really does win the race. And so, well into the game of life, Toussaint Louverture made his entrance as a leader, the kind of late bloomer who shows up to the party just when things are getting interesting. Now, let's dive into 1791, a year that redefined the term chaotic beginnings for the Haitian Revolution. If you thought your high school drama was intense, you haven't seen anything yet. The uprising's kickoff wasn't exactly a meticulously planned operation. It was more like a series of wild, cascading events that resembled an unscripted soap opera mixed with a dash of revolution. Picture this. Saint-Domingue was a pressure cooker of social tensions ready to explode. The colony's population was a volatile mix. Roughly 500,000 enslaved Africans, about 40,000 white colonists, and 30,000 free people of color, each group with its own ambitions and grievances. The enslaved population, having endured unimaginable brutality, was fed up. They were inspired by the fiery ideals of the French Revolution, although their version of liberté, égalité, fraternité came with a distinct Creole twist. The revolution kicked off in August 1791 with the Bois Caiman ceremony, a voodoo ritual that doubled as a rallying cry for rebellion. It wasn't long before plantations were ablaze and the colony was engulfed in chaos. For many, this was the point of no return. But remember, Toussaint was not the type to jump headfirst into the fray. He watched as chaos unfurled and bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. Now, let's talk military strategy. Toussaint Louverture didn't have formal military training, but he didn't need a diploma to read the battlefield like a seasoned general. He transformed his experience managing plantation logistics into military strategy, proving that running a plantation can oddly prepare you for commanding troops. His strategic brilliance shone through as he organized the insurgent forces, turning ragtag bands of rebels into a formidable army. His knowledge of the local terrain was unmatched, allowing him to execute surprise attacks and guerrilla tactics that left colonial powers scrambling. In the world of politics, Toussaint was a master chess player. He knew that alliances were as crucial as firepower. Enter the jaw-dropping moment when he allied with the Spanish, who controlled the eastern part of the island, present-day Dominican Republic. This was a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Spanish were eager to undermine the French and saw Toussaint as a useful ally. For Toussaint, this was less about loyalty and more about leveraging opportunities. It was politics with a dash of survival instinct. He was playing the long game. By 1794, the winds of change swept through France. The revolutionary government, desperate to keep its Caribbean colony, abolished slavery. It was a move designed to win over the enslaved population and bring leaders like Toussaint back into the fold. And just like that, Toussaint switched sides. This wasn't some fickle betrayal. It was a calculated maneuver. He aligned with the French because it served his ultimate goal, emancipation and the continued fight for the rights of his people. Toussaint's ability to navigate these treacherous political waters was nothing short of genius. He understood that in the high-stakes game of revolution, loyalty was a luxury he couldn't afford. It was about survival and securing the best possible outcome for his people. He wasn't just a military leader, he was a statesman, albeit one who played by his own rules. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. Toussaint's alliances were complex and fraught with moral ambiguity. His decision to ally with the Spanish, who were themselves slaveholders, wasn't without controversy. But in the messy reality of revolutionary politics, there were no easy choices. Toussaint was navigating a landscape where ideals often collided with pragmatism. As the revolution unfolded, Toussaint's leadership became increasingly pivotal. He knew that the fight wasn't just about freeing enslaved people. It was about creating a society where they could thrive. His vision extended beyond immediate emancipation to long-term stability and prosperity for Saint-Domingue. In his mind, this wasn't just a rebellion, it was the foundation of a new nation. Despite the chaos and shifting allegiances, Toussaint Louverture remained steadfast in his mission. His story reminds us that sometimes the path to greatness isn't a straight line, but a series of calculated moves. He was a man who understood that in the game of revolution, the most important skill wasn't just wielding a sword, but knowing when to strike and when to hold back. His ability to adapt and strategize was a testament to his brilliance as a leader. So, as we leave this part of the story, remember that Toussaint Louverture wasn't just a figurehead in the Haitian Revolution. He was its architect, navigating the stormy seas of rebellion with a steady hand and a keen eye for opportunity. And while his story is far from over, it's clear that his legacy was built not on the romantic ideals of revolution, but on the gritty reality of politics and survival. Stay tuned, because if you think this was the peak of the drama, you're in for a wild ride in the chapters to come. So, where were we? Ah, yes, Toussaint Louverture, the man who could juggle alliances like a Cirque du Soleil performer, was about to hit the peak of his power. We're diving into the late 1790s, a time when Toussaint was not just leading armies, but also reshaping the socio-economic landscape of Saint-Domingue. Forget the romanticized image of a revolutionary hero wielding a sword under a flag of freedom. This was more like an episode of Extreme Makeover, Colony Edition. Toussaint's vision was as grand as it was pragmatic, a semi-autonomous Haiti that, could stand on its own economically while still being tied to France. Not exactly what you'd expect from a guy leading a slave rebellion, right? But Toussaint wasn't about burning the house down. He was more interested in a major renovation. To keep the economy afloat, he knew he needed to get those sugar and coffee plantations humming again. Cue the labour policies that made some folks scratch their heads or, in more extreme cases, shake their fists. See? Toussaint's labour policies were about as popular as a mosquito at a picnic. They had this uncomfortable resemblance to the old system of slavery. Under his regime, former enslaved people were required to continue working on the plantations, albeit for wages. This was less freedom, and more freedom, with a side of obligation. The plantations were split into sections, each managed by a commandeur or overseer, who ensured productivity didn't drop faster than a rock in a pond. It was a system designed to keep the cash crops flowing, essential for economic stability and, let's face it, to keep the French from flipping their powdered wigs. Now, let's not sugarcoat it, pun entirely intended. This system wasn't winning any popularity contests. Toussaint transformed the plantation economy into a state-controlled enterprise, which sounds great on paper but was a hard sell to folks who'd just thrown off the shackles of slavery. It was a necessary evil, a bitter pill to swallow. But it kept the colony's economy from collapsing like a poorly built soufflé. By 1801, the colony was exporting over 40 million pounds of sugar and 3.5 million pounds of coffee annually. Not too shabby for a place that had been in revolutionary chaos just a few years prior. Toussaint's reforms weren't limited to agriculture. He had his sights set on education and healthcare, establishing schools and hospitals. His leadership was all about laying the groundwork for a society that could stand tall, even if it meant making decisions that were less "Viva la Révolution" and more "Let's keep the lights on." He was playing the long game, trying to build a future where Haitians could thrive, even if their dreams of complete autonomy were still a flickering candle in the wind. This brings us to Toussaint's political maneuvers. He envisioned a Haiti that was semi-autonomous, a tricky balance between independence and colonial oversight. It's like trying to walk a tightrope while juggling flaming torches. Not impossible, but definitely not for the faint of heart. He drafted a constitution in 1801 that declared himself governor for life, which sounds more like a Bond villain move than a revolutionary leader's. But it was a strategic play designed to ensure stability and continuity during turbulent times. Toussaint's constitution was a masterpiece of diplomatic tightrope walking. It acknowledged French sovereignty while granting the colony autonomy in domestic affairs. It was the kind of compromise that had the potential to please everyone and no one at the same time. Of course, Napoleon Bonaparte, the man with an ego as grand as his military ambitions, had other plans. He wasn't about to let some Caribbean island slip through his fingers like sand at the beach. Underneath the layers of strategy and diplomacy lay the harsh reality of Toussaint's leadership. It wasn't all glory and grandeur. There was a gritty underbelly to his reign. While he pushed for economic recovery and social reforms, the spectre of forced labour loomed large. Toussaint's policies were pragmatic, but they bore an unnerving resemblance to the very system he sought to reform. It was a complex dance of ideals and practicality, a high-stakes game where the prize was nothing less than the future of a nation. Yet, amid these pragmatic decisions, Toussaint remained a figure of hope. His vision of a stable, prosperous Haiti wasn't just about economics, it was about dignity and self-reliance. He worked tirelessly to protect the rights of former enslaved people, even as he navigated the murky waters of colonial politics. His leadership was a mix of hard-nosed realism and unwavering idealism, a combination that made him both revered and reviled. But let's not forget, this wasn't some solo act. Toussaint had allies, rivals, and a colony full of people with their own dreams and grievances. His leadership was as much about managing these relationships as it was about steering the ship of state. He was a diplomat, a tactician, and, at times, a reluctant autocrat, all roles he played with a singular focus on securing the best possible future for his people. As we near the end of this chapter, Toussaint Louverture's legacy is still unfolding. His story is one of contradictions, a man who fought for freedom while enforcing labour policies that seemed at odds with his ideals. Yet, his vision for a semi-autonomous Haiti was nothing short of revolutionary. It was a dream that could have reshaped the Caribbean had it not been for the looming shadow of betrayal from across the Atlantic. In the end, Toussaint's story is a testament to the complexities of leadership and the harsh realities of revolution. It reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, pragmatism, and the relentless pursuit of a better future. So, stay tuned, because the next part of Toussaint's tale is about to take some dramatic turns. If you thought the political intrigue was intense now, just wait until Napoleon enters the scene with all the subtlety of a cannonball. And just like that, the curtain was about to rise on Act 3 of the Toussaint Louverture saga, with Napoleon Bonaparte playing the role of the unwelcome guest who crashes the party just when it's hitting its stride. You see, while Louverture was busy turning Saint-Domingue into a model of semi-autonomous governance, Napoleon had other ideas, namely bringing the colony back under the warm imperial embrace of France, or more accurately, his own grasping hands. In 1802, Napoleon deployed a formidable fleet of 20,000 troops to Saint-Domingue under the command of his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc. You could almost hear the collective sigh of islanders who thought they'd seen the last of European interference. To put it in perspective, 20,000 troops was nearly half the size of the entire British Army at the time. This wasn't just a casual visit, it was a full-blown military invasion. Leclerc, like a door-to-door salesman with a questionable product, promised the locals peace and prosperity while quietly plotting to reinstate slavery. Toussaint, no stranger to political games, tried to play it cool. He negotiated, he stalled, he even entertained the possibility of finding common ground. But let's be real, this was a diplomatic dance on a floor strewn with landmines. As tensions escalated, Louverture's forces clashed with Leclerc's troops in a brutal series of engagements. Initially, Toussaint held his ground, employing his usual guerrilla tactics, but he was facing an adversary with resources that seemed bottomless. The battles raged on for months, draining both sides but slowly tipping the scales in favour of the French. By May 1802, it became clear that this wasn't going to end with a handshake and a friendly game of pétanque. Eventually, Toussaint was forced to capitulate, agreeing to retire peacefully to his farm in Innery. But, plot twist, peaceful retirements aren't really a thing when you're dealing with Napoleon. In June 1802, the French arrested him under the guise of inviting him to a meeting. So much for diplomacy, right? And now on to Toussaint's travelogue of despair. He was shipped off to France, arriving in August 1802, a place about as foreign to a man of the Caribbean as a snowstorm in the Sahara. His destination? The Fort de Joux, a fortress nestled in the Jura Mountains. This wasn't some cozy country retreat. It was a drafty, stone-cold prison with all the charm of a medieval dungeon. Toussaint, accustomed to the tropical warmth of Saint-Domingue, found himself in a climate that was less island paradise and more freezing tundra. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor was it on history buffs who would later chuckle at the absurdity of it all. He famously complained about the cold, like a Floridian visiting Canada in January. The man could outmaneuver armies, but couldn't negotiate with the icy winds that seeped through the prison walls. Now, let's talk about those alleged last words. In overthrowing me, you have cut down in Saint-Domingue only the trunk of the Tree of Liberty. They sound like something plucked straight from a Hollywood script, dripping with gravitas and defiance. But here's the kicker. There's no solid evidence Toussaint actually said them. It might just be history's equivalent of a mic drop moment, crafted by later admirers to cement his legacy as a martyr for freedom. This kind of myth-making is as human as storytelling itself. We crave heroes with last words that echo through time, even if reality is less poetic. In truth, Toussaint's final months were more about survival than soliloquies. The harsh conditions at Fort de Joux took their toll, and he succumbed to pneumonia in April 1803. A tragic end, not with a defiant roar, but a quiet fade, far from the land he fought to liberate. But let's not close the book just yet. Toussaint's demise was not the end of the story. It was merely the closing of a chapter. His life set in motion a chain of events that would lead to Haiti's independence in 1804, a testament to the resilience and determination of a people who refused to be shackled by their past. So, was Toussaint Louverture's legacy the trunk, the roots, or the entire Tree of Liberty? That's a debate for historians, armchair philosophers, and anyone who appreciates the messy, complicated beauty of history. What we do know is that his life was a tapestry woven with ambition, strategy, and an unyielding spirit. And even as he faced his downfall, the seeds he planted continued to grow far beyond the reach of any empire. As we pause here, remember that history is not just a recounting of events, but a living narrative shaped by those who dare to dream and act. Toussaint Louverture was one such dreamer, and his legacy is a reminder that even in the face of defeat, the fight for liberty is never truly lost. So, stay tuned as we dive into the final act of this revolutionary tale, where the echoes of Toussaint's struggle continue to shape the destiny of Haiti and beyond. Toussaint Louverture's struggle may have ended in the icy grip of a French prison, but the fires of revolution he ignited were far from extinguished. Fast forward to 1804, and Saint-Domingue was out of its cocoon, emerging as the first independent nation in Latin America and the Caribbean, the newly minted Haiti. It was a victory that sent shock waves through the colonial world, like a cannonball fired across the bow of imperialism. Now, let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. This wasn't exactly a fairy tale ending. The road to independence was paved with enough twists and blood to make a soap opera writer blush. After Toussaint's arrest, Jean-Jacques Dessalines took the helm, steering the revolution to its tumultuous conclusion. Dessalines, Toussaint's former lieutenant, was cut from the same strategic cloth but with a distinctly more aggressive thread. He wasn't about to negotiate with the French, he was there to kick them out with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Vertières on November 18th, 1803. Imagine the scene. A ragtag army of former enslaved people and free blacks, armed with a hodgepodge of weapons and an unyielding determination to be free, squaring off against one of Europe's finest military machines. On paper, it looked like a David and Goliath scenario, but history loves an underdog, especially one with a chip on its shoulder the size of a mountain. The Haitians fought with a ferocity that left the French reeling, and by the end of the day, victory belonged to Dessalines and his forces. Come January 1, 1804, Dessalines declared independence, and Haiti was born. The name itself was a nod to the island's Taino roots, a symbolic reclamation of identity and heritage. But the celebrations were tempered by the grim realities of building a nation from the ashes of war. The economy was in tatters, infrastructure was non-existent, and the fledgling nation was burdened with a legacy of colonial exploitation. Yet, despite these formidable challenges, Haiti stood as a beacon of hope and defiance, a testament to the power of resilience and the human spirit. Toussaint Louverture's legacy was woven into the very fabric of this new nation. Though he didn't live to see Haiti's independence, his vision of a free and self-reliant society persisted. The revolution he helped lead was a clarion call for abolitionists worldwide, proving that enslaved peoples could rise up and seize their destiny. It was a slap in the face to colonial powers, a warning that the days of unchecked imperial dominance were numbered. Globally, the Haitian Revolution sent ripples across the Atlantic, inspiring movements and rebellions in the Americas and beyond. In the United States, slaveholders trembled at the thought of a similar uprising, while abolitionists found in Haiti a powerful example of resistance. The revolution challenged the status quo, forcing nations to confront the moral and economic contradictions of slavery. It was a moment of reckoning, a harbinger of change that would unfold over the coming decades. Yet, Toussaint's story is not just one of triumph. It's a complex tapestry of contradictions and compromises. His labor policies, which bore an unsettling resemblance to the plantation system, were a stark reminder that revolution was rarely a clean break from the past. He was a leader who navigated the murky waters of pragmatism and idealism, a man who understood that the path to freedom was fraught with difficult choices. Myth and reality often blur in the telling of Toussaint's tale. The romantic image of the gallant revolutionary can overshadow the gritty truths of his leadership. The myth paints him as a flawless hero, a liberator without blemish, but the reality is far more nuanced. Toussaint was a man of his time, grappling with the immense challenges of revolution and governance. He was a tactician, a negotiator, and at times a reluctant autocrat, driven by a singular goal, the emancipation and empowerment of his people. In the end, Toussaint Louverture's legacy is a testament to the power of human agency and the complexity of leadership. He remains a symbol of freedom and resilience, a figure whose life continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. His story is a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experiences shaped by the choices and actions of those who dare to dream. And there you have it. A revolutionary tale that defies easy categorization, a story of triumph and tragedy, of ideals and pragmatism. Toussaint Louverture's life may have ended in a freezing fortress, but his spirit endures, a beacon for all who strive for justice and equality. As we close this chapter, let's take a moment to reflect on the enduring power of his legacy and the lessons it teaches us about the complexities of freedom and the human condition. In the end, history is a living narrative, and Toussaint's story is a vibrant thread woven into its rich tapestry. You wake up to the sound of roosters doing their thing because alarm clocks are still a few centuries away. Welcome to your day as a Han Dynasty scholar in 2nd century China. It's the morning, and even though you're a brainy type, the first thing you need isn't a scroll. It's breakfast, maybe a steaming bowl of congee to start your day. As you enjoy your morning meal, let's dive into the political landscape that's going to occupy your mind today. Now, let's talk about Emperor Juan, the guy who's technically running the show, or at least supposed to be. He might be the emperor, but his actual job performance often resembles that of a celebrity more interested in throwing lavish parties than in governance. Picture a ruler who spends 10,000 pieces of gold on a single banquet. Yes, you heard that right. That's more gold than most people will see in their lifetime, all gone in one night of revelry. The emperor's lifestyle is so extravagant, it makes modern-day billionaires seem like penny pinchers. Emperor Juan's love for opulence isn't just a personal quirk. It's a financial black hole that's impacting the whole empire. The treasury is bleeding funds faster than an underfunded startup. It's your job to navigate this economic minefield, and you've got a front row seat to the fiscal chaos. While you're not exactly counting coins in the imperial vault, you do get to see how these lavish expenses trickle down, or don't, into the lives of ordinary folks. Spoiler alert, they don't. As you step into the bureaucratic behemoth that is the Han government, you realize it's not unlike a maze designed by a particularly sadistic architect. You're part of this intricate system, a cog in a machine that runs on scrolls, ink, and a lot of patience. Your role? To interpret and implement policies that, at best, resemble a patchwork quilt of ideas, some good, some bad, and some downright confusing. It's a world of red tape and formalities, with more paperwork than you can shake a bamboo stick at. The Han government is a sprawling entity with layers upon layers of bureaucracy. Imagine a structure so complex that the word efficiency seems like a distant dream. As a scholar, you're tasked with navigating this cumbersome apparatus, and it's no small feat. You're essentially the Google of the 2nd century, tasked with knowing everything about everything, from Confucian teachings to the latest edicts from the emperor's court. Now, let's put your role into a bit of context. You're not just any scholar, you're part of a class that's supposed to balance the emperor's whims with the needs of the people. It's a bit like being the middle child in a dysfunctional family. You have to keep the peace, make sure everyone's happy, and somehow do it all without losing your mind. And while your work might not make headlines, or scroll lines rather, your influence is significant. You're shaping policies that affect millions, even if no one realizes it. As you shuffle through the corridors of power, you can't help but notice the stark divide between the emperor's lavish lifestyle and the economic realities faced by the empire. It's a bit like watching a train wreck in slow motion, except you're part of the crew trying to put the tracks back together. The emperor's financial habits aren't just a drain, they're a symptom of a larger issue. An empire struggling with internal strife, corruption, and the ever-present threat of rebellion. Your day is filled with meetings, consultations, and the occasional heated debate. You're surrounded by fellow scholars, each with their own opinions and interpretations of how things should be run. It's a bit like being part of a never-ending academic conference, only with higher stakes and a lot more tea. You discuss everything from the practicality of certain policies to the philosophical underpinnings of Confucianism, all while trying to keep your sanity intact. Despite the chaos, there's a certain thrill to being part of this grand experiment called governance. You're not just a passive observer, you're an active participant in shaping the course of history. Sure, there are days when you question if it's all worth it, especially when you hear yet another tale of the emperor's latest extravagance. But deep down, you know that your work matters. You're part of a legacy that will be debated, analysed, and romanticised for centuries to come. And there's something undeniably cool about that. As the day progresses, you find yourself reflecting on the emperor's reputation. He's not exactly the poster child for responsible leadership, but there's a certain allure to his story. The myths and legends surrounding his reign paint a picture of a ruler who lived life to the fullest, consequences be damned. It's the kind of story that makes for great drama, even if the reality is much less glamorous. In truth, Emperor Juan's reign is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of responsible governance. By the time the sun begins to set, you've had your fill of politics and bureaucracy for one day. But before you head home, let's take a moment to appreciate the bigger picture. You're living in a time of change and transformation, a period that will leave a lasting mark on the annals of history. And while the emperor's antics might be the stuff of legend, it's the quiet, often overlooked work of scholars like you that truly shapes the future. So, as you prepare to unwind and recharge for another day in the world of Han Dynasty politics, take a moment to pat yourself on the back. You're part of an intellectual elite that's doing its best to steer the ship in the right direction, even if the captain seems more interested in throwing lavish parties than plotting a steady course. It's a tough gig, but someone's got to do it. And who better than you? As you head home, the weight of being a Han Dynasty scholar lingers like a shadow. But let's switch gears and dive into the life of a scholar, where intellectual rigor isn't just a lifestyle, it's an Olympic sport. First up, Confucius's Analects. You know, that hefty collection of wisdom that every scholar worth their salt must master. Imagine trying to cram your brain with teachings that make your head spin faster than a Han Dynasty abacus. Memorizing these texts isn't a casual weekend hobby, it's a full-time job, and the stakes are higher than a kite festival. Now, let's talk calligraphy. To us modern folks, it's an art form, but back in the day, it was considered a window to your soul. Your brush strokes needed to be as precise as your knowledge of Confucianism. Each character you ink on silk or bamboo is a testament to your discipline, patience, and ability to not spill ink on your robes. Imagine holding your breath as you glide the brush, praying you don't mess up the delicate strokes that could make or break your scholarly reputation. Think of it as the ancient version of typography, but with way more pressure and less undo's button. Speaking of pressure, let's dive into the examination process, the rite of passage that could elevate you to a cushy government job or doom you to obscurity faster than you can say Mandarin. Forget the SATs or ACTs. The Han Dynasty civil service exams were the real deal, covering everything from ethics to astronomy. Picture spending years preparing for a test that could determine your entire future. It's like putting all your eggs in one basket and then hoping the basket doesn't topple over during an earthquake. The exam halls were filled with hopefuls whose dreams rested on the edge of a bamboo strip. The exam process was as grueling as a modern-day marathon, minus the sneakers, but with double the mental gymnastics. You'd sit for days, answering questions that tested everything from your moral compass to your knowledge of celestial phenomena. If you thought calculus was rough, try explaining the movements of the stars with nothing but ancient texts to guide you. And here's the kicker. Only a select few passed. We're talking about success rates that make modern-day lotteries look generous. Those who succeeded were welcomed into the corridors of power, while the rest were left to ponder the meaning of life outside the palace gates. It's a system that sounds both romantic and ruthless, where meritocracy meets the brutal reality of limited opportunities. The allure of the scholar's life is undeniable, a story we love to romanticize. Brilliant minds changing the world with little more than ink and paper. But here's the reality check. It was also a grind, a relentless pursuit of perfection in a world that demanded excellence without compromise. You weren't just learning to better yourself, you were learning to survive in a society that valued knowledge as the highest currency. As the sun sets on your day, consider the paradox of the scholarly life. It's both a privilege and a burden, a path that offers prestige but requires sacrifice. Scholars were the intellectual elite, yet their world was one of constant scrutiny, where every mistake could cost them dearly. It's the kind of pressure that makes you wonder why anyone would choose this path. But then you remember the allure of shaping history and influencing empires. So, as you prepare for another day of intellectual gladiatorship, remember that being a Han Dynasty scholar is more than just a job. It's a calling. You're part of a tradition that values knowledge above all else, a legacy that will echo through the ages. And while the romantic myths might gloss over the harsh realities, the truth is far more compelling. You're not just living history, you're making it one brushstroke at a time. Now that you've soaked in the world of Han Dynasty scholarship, let's hit pause on the brainy stuff. It's time for a midday break, a chance to explore the grand tapestry of society that makes this era tick. Grab your bamboo fan, because we're about to dive into the social fabric of second-century China, a complex weave of status, power, and Confucian ideals. First, let's talk class hierarchy. If you thought the high school cafeteria had cliques, wait until you see the Han Dynasty's social structure. It was as rigid as the Great Wall and just as imposing. At the top of the pyramid were the nobility, living at large in estates that would make Versailles look like a starter home. These estates were sprawling complexes, complete with private gardens, elaborate banquet halls, and more servants than you could shake a jade sceptre at. Contrast that with the peasant huts, humble abodes that could barely contain a family, let alone a grand party. These were basic, often one-room affairs with mud walls and thatched roofs, offering about as much comfort as a stone mattress. Peasants made up the backbone of Han society, toiling away in fields for long hours to produce the rice and millet that kept everyone fed. While the nobles dined on delicacies like roasted pig and exotic fruits, most peasants considered themselves lucky to have a bowl of millet porridge. This stark divide wasn't just about who had the fanciest house. It dictated every aspect of life, from what you wore to how you were treated in legal matters. The Han Dynasty's legal system, unsurprisingly, favored the wealthy. If you found yourself in court, your social standing could mean the difference between a slap on the wrist and a public flogging. It was a world where the scales of justice were tipped by the weight of your coin purse. Now, let's chat about the role of women. On paper, Han women were sidelined, their lives dictated by Confucian ideals that preached obedience to father, husband, and son. But here's where reality throws a curveball. Despite official narratives, women wielded influence in unexpected ways. Take Empress Do, for example, who was the real power behind the throne for much of her life, steering the empire with a deft hand while her husband wore the crown. Women in the Han Dynasty often managed household affairs, which in wealthy families meant overseeing vast estates and managing considerable wealth. They were the unsung CEOs of their time, running the show from behind the scenes. Even in peasant families, women contributed significantly to agriculture and household production, their labor crucial to survival. And let's not forget education. While formal schooling was rare for women, many learned to read and write, mastering the art of correspondence to maintain family alliances. Confucianism, the philosophical bedrock of the Han Dynasty, permeated every corner of society. Its teachings emphasized hierarchy, duty, and filial piety principles that reinforced social stratification but also provided a moral framework that many found comforting. The Analects of Confucius were as revered as religious texts, guiding behavior and reinforcing the notion that everyone had a place and a role to fulfill. This societal structure was maintained by a mix of cultural norms and legal codes, like the Han Code, a set of laws that prescribed everything from marriage customs to property rights. And just like today, money talked. Wealth could sometimes buy you a way up the ladder, whether through strategic marriages or by purchasing an official title. It wasn't exactly meritocracy in action, but it was the game people played, navigating a world where social mobility was as elusive as a butterfly in a hurricane. The myths of the Han Dynasty paint a picture of a harmonious society, each class and gender fulfilling its role with grace and dignity. But peel back the layers, and the reality is far more textured. It was a society of contradictions, where power and influence often lay hidden beneath the surface. A place where the official narrative of order and propriety masked a complex web of personal ambitions and social maneuvering. As you stroll through the streets of a Han city, you can almost hear the clamour of merchants hawking their wares, the chatter of scholars discussing philosophy, and the quiet determination of peasants going about their daily grind. It's a vibrant, bustling tableau, one where every character has a part to play in the grand drama of history. So, as you sip your midday tea, or perhaps a stronger brew, take a moment to reflect on the intricate dance of life in the Han Dynasty. It's a world where the past and present collide, where legends are born, and where the reality of daily life is every bit as fascinating as the myths. And remember, we're just getting started. There's plenty more to explore as we continue our journey through this remarkable era. As you sip your midday tea, or perhaps a stronger brew, take a moment to reflect on the intricate dance of life in the Han Dynasty. It's a world where the past and present collide, where legends are born, and where the reality of daily life is every bit as fascinating as the myths. But let's not get too cozy. It's time to peel back the layers of the scholar's life and reveal a world that's less about serene wisdom and more about political maneuvering worthy of a Shakespearean drama. Welcome to the cutthroat universe of Han court politics, where alliances are as fleeting as a summer rain and trust is a luxury no one can afford. First up, let's tackle the image of the scholar as a peaceful sage, quietly pondering the mysteries of the universe with a cup of tea in hand. The truth? It's more like a high-stakes poker game, and everyone's bluffing. The Han scholar wasn't just a bookworm but a political animal, navigating a labyrinth of intrigue that would make Machiavelli proud. Every smile, every nod, every seemingly innocuous conversation was a potential play for power, or an attempt to dodge a metaphorical dagger. Take the infamous case of the eunuch faction, a group whose influence in the imperial court was anything but minor. These officials wielded power with the precision of a master swordsman, cutting down rivals and promoting allies with ruthless efficiency. Imagine a workplace where your colleague could have you demoted, or worse, just by whispering in the emperor's ear. In this world, a misplaced word could cost you everything. Primary sources, like the Ziji Tongjian, a comprehensive chronicle, reveal that scholars were not just passive commentators, but active players in this dangerous game. They were the policy wonks of their day, crafting edicts and advising on matters that could shift the balance of power. Think of them as the original spin doctors, spinning narratives as deftly as they spun silk. But with great power came great paranoia. To say the court was a pressure cooker would be an understatement. It was more like a volcano, constantly on the brink of eruption, and scholars were often caught in the lava flow of courtly ambitions. Consider the tale of Kai Lun, credited with inventing paper around 105 CE. Kai Lun wasn't just a crafty inventor, he was a court official navigating a political minefield. Despite his contributions to this world-changing technology, his life was far from idyllic. He fell victim to the whims of palace intrigue, ultimately taking his own life when court politics turned against him. It's a grim reminder that being on the emperor's good side one day could mean being on the chopping block the next. And speaking of emperors, let's talk about Emperor Ling, whose reign was more theatrical than a Broadway show. Ling's preference for eunuchs over traditional scholars created a rift that scholars had to navigate delicately. Imagine working under a boss who'd rather be entertained than informed, where policy decisions could be swayed by who had the best joke or the most flattering compliment. Scholars had to walk a tightrope, balancing their advice with the emperor's capricious whims, all while ensuring they didn't fall out of favor. The stakes were high, and the rewards could be immense. Success meant prestige, wealth, and influence. Failure? Well, that could mean exile, disgrace, or worse. The Han court was a place where one's fortunes could change faster than a horse race, and scholars were the jockeys trying to steer their careers to victory. It was a world where every move was calculated, every interaction analyzed, and every outcome uncertain. But why was it so cutthroat? In a word, power. The Han Dynasty was an empire in flux, its stability often threatened by internal strife and external pressures. Influence at court wasn't just about personal gain, it was a way to shape the empire's future. Scholars were the strategists, the brains behind the brawn, tasked with ensuring the dynasty's survival in an unpredictable world. Their role was to advise and guide, but also to protect their interests and those of their allies in a constantly shifting political landscape. This isn't to say the myths about serene scholars are entirely unfounded. The romantic image exists because there were moments of genuine intellectual pursuit, times when scholars could retreat to their studies and lose themselves in the elegance of calligraphy or the wisdom of Confucian texts. Yet these moments were fleeting, often overshadowed by the harsh realities of court life. The allure of the scholar's life was undeniable, but it came with a significant price. So, the next time you hear about the wisdom and tranquility of ancient Chinese scholars, Remember the reality, a world of intrigue, betrayal, and relentless ambition. It's a story as old as time, where knowledge was both a weapon and a shield, wielded by those who dared to play the Game of Thrones. And as the afternoon sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the courtyard, you realize that being a Han scholar was less about serenity and more about survival. With that in mind, let's keep our eyes sharp and our wits sharper. After all, the day isn't over yet, and in the world of Han Dynasty politics, anything can happen, and usually does. As you navigate this historical landscape, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of it all. It's a tale of ambition and intrigue, where legends are born and reality is often stranger than fiction. And as the story continues to unfold, remember, in the world of the Han Dynasty scholar, the only constant is change. Just as the shadows of the afternoon stretch across the cobbled streets, you find yourself contemplating the Han Dynasty's legacy, a tapestry woven with threads of innovation and threads of inevitable decline. It's like considering a beautiful tapestry that started to unravel at the edges. There's beauty in the design, but also a reminder of its fragility. Let's start with a highlight reel of Han innovations that would make any civilization green with envy. First, there's the invention of paper, courtesy of our friend Kai Lun. Imagine the world without paper. No books, no letters, no sticky notes reminding you to buy more rice. Paper wasn't just a convenience, it was a revolution. It democratized knowledge, made record-keeping a breeze, and gave scholars the chance to doodle their profound thoughts without carving them into stone. Kai Lun's creation around 25 CE was a game-changer, the kind that makes you wonder how anyone ever managed with bamboo slips and silk scrolls. But like every great innovation, it came with its own set of challenges. The production of paper started small, more artisanal than industrial, and it took a while before it replaced the traditional mediums. Still, the idea of a lightweight, portable medium was too tempting to pass up. In a way, paper was the ancient world's version of a disruptive startup, small beginnings with massive implications. Now, while paper stole the show, the Han Dynasty was also busy rolling out other technological marvels. Consider the seismograph invented by Zhang Heng in 32 CE. This was no flimsy gadget, it could detect earthquakes hundreds of miles away. Imagine a bronze vessel with dragons and toads, alerting you to seismic activity like an ancient world's version of an early warning system. It was science fiction stuff for the time, and it showcased the Han's knack for blending science with practical leads. Yet, innovation wasn't limited to technology. The Han also standardized the currency, introduced the Silk Road, and expanded the empire to unprecedented heights. Under Emperor Wu, the empire stretched its borders further than a marathon runner's dreams, covering roughly 6 million square kilometers at its peak. That's like annexing Europe and calling it a day. This expansion wasn't just about land, it was about influence, trade, and the spread of Han culture far and wide. But as we know, every golden age casts a shadow. The Han Dynasty also had its fair share of issues that would make any modern government cringe. Corruption was a constant companion, with bureaucrats and eunuchs often diverting funds for personal gain. The decline in moral and administrative discipline was like watching a slow-motion car crash, painful, inevitable, and thoroughly avoidable. The dynasty's eventual decline was marked by power struggles that would rival any soap opera. Factionalism within the court was rampant, and emperors often found themselves mere puppets in the hands of more powerful ministers or eunuch factions. By the time Emperor Ling took the throne, the once robust administrative system resembled a sieve, leaking authority and effectiveness at every turn. It's a tale as old as time. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Economic factors played a significant role in this downward spiral. Heavy taxation and forced labor for grandiose projects left the peasantry disgruntled and impoverished. When the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted in 1804 CE, it wasn't just a revolt, it was the cry of a populace pushed to the brink. It was as if the empire's foundation had been built on sand, and the tide was coming in. So why, despite these issues, does the Han Dynasty hold a revered place in history? It's like looking at an old photograph, faded, with its blemishes, but holding a nostalgia that's hard to shake. The Han period is often viewed as a golden age because it laid the foundations for what would become a unified Chinese identity. It was a time of cultural flowering, when Confucianism was elevated to the state philosophy, creating a moral and ethical framework that resonates in China even today. The Han Dynasty's impact on Chinese history is akin to the Renaissance's effect on Europe, a period of enlightenment and cultural blossoming that left indelible marks. Its echoes can be heard in modern China, from the bureaucratic system still in use to the emphasis on centralized control and Confucian values. The Han era's ability to marry innovation with cultural development created a legacy that transcends its temporal boundaries. As you wind down your day, consider the duality of the Han Dynasty, a beacon of innovation and culture, yet a cautionary tale of unchecked power and systemic corruption. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a complex narrative shaped by human ambition and frailty. The Han Dynasty may have ended, but its story lives on, a mirror reflecting both the heights of human achievement and the depths of its failings. So, as the sun dips below the horizon, casting the world in twilight, you carry with you the weight of history's lessons. You've journeyed through the halls of power, felt the pulse of innovation, and witnessed the fragility of human constructs. And perhaps, as you prepare to retire for the night, the stories of the Han Dynasty will linger, a testament to the enduring power of history to inform, inspire, and caution. Because in the end, the past isn't just a record of what was, it's a guide to what could be, if only we listen.